While going through old family photos, I found one with a man I didn't recognize, standing next to my mom, smiling. When I asked about him, she froze and said, "It's nothing. Forget it." I haven't stopped thinking about it. Who was he? Why keep him a secret all these years? The more I press, the more distant she becomes. Some truths feel like they're buried for a reason. But what if they define who you are? The attic smelled of dust and cedarwood, the kind of smell that clings to memories you haven't touched in years. Eleanor climbed the narrow, creaking stairs, the thin beam of her flashlight cutting through the shadows. Each step groaned under her weight, a reminder that the house had been standing far longer than she had been alive. She had come here that evening with the intention of retrieving a single box of old photographs, a box she hadn't opened since she was a child. The dim light of the attic filtered through the single grimy window, casting distorted shapes against the stacks of cardboard boxes and discarded furniture. There was a stillness up there, like the air itself was holding its breath. Enjoying the story? Hit like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Her fingers trembled slightly as she pulled the box closer, brushing off the fine layer of dust that coated its surface. It had been years since she had felt the old ache of nostalgia so sharply. Years since the small, bittersweet pull of memory that made her heart tighten. She lifted the lid carefully, revealing a cascade of photographs. Some curled at the edges. Others faded with the unforgiving passage of time. Eleanor's breath caught as she sifted through them, seeing herself as a child, her mother with a younger, carefree face, family holidays that smelled of barbecue smoke and sun-baked grass. And then she saw him. He was standing next to her mother in one photograph, grinning broadly at the camera, his hand resting lightly on her mother's shoulder. Eleanor froze, the photo trembling slightly in her hands. He was a stranger. At least he was to her. His presence was incongruous, a piece of her mother's past she had never known existed. She turned the photo over, half expecting some scrawled name or date. But there was nothing. Just a blank, silent back. She carried the photograph downstairs slowly, her footsteps echoing in the hollow house. Her mother was in the kitchen, humming softly as she cleaned the counters, the familiar rhythm of soap against tile filling the space with mundane comfort. Eleanor held the photo out with a steady hand, forcing herself to appear casual, though her chest felt heavy, tight with a sudden, inexplicable fear. "Mom," she said, her voice carefully light. "Who's this?" Her mother froze mid-motion, a sponge dripping suds onto the countertop. The hum left her lips abruptly, replaced by an odd tightness around her eyes. She looked at the photograph, her gaze lingering too long, and then she straightened, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "It's nothing," she said, her voice flat, almost brittle. "Forget it." Eleanor's heart sank. There was a hesitation there, a crack in the facade she had never seen before. She studied her mother, looking for any hint of recognition or fear, but her mother's eyes were distant, locked behind a wall Eleanor had never breached. I just want to know," Eleanor said softly, the warmth of the kitchen suddenly feeling oppressive, the walls pressing in with the weight of unspoken things. "Why don't I remember him?" Her mother's hand trembled slightly as she wiped it on a towel, an almost imperceptible movement that made Eleanor's stomach knot. "I said, forget it," she repeated, a little more forcefully this time, the edge in her voice sharp enough to cut through the warmth of the evening. Then she turned, busying herself with the dishes, as if that could erase the moment entirely. Eleanor left the kitchen without another word. She went to her room, the photograph clutched tightly against her chest. That night, sleep eluded her. Her mind raced in loops, turning the photograph over and over, examining the man's grin, the easy familiarity in the way he touched her mother's shoulder. It was as if he had been a part of their lives, woven into a story she had never been told. And yet, as far as she knew, he wasn't supposed to exist. Days passed, but the man in the photograph lingered in Eleanor's mind like a shadow. Every time she looked at her mother, she searched for something. An unguarded glance, a flicker of guilt. But there was only the calm, practiced composure that had defined her mother for as long as Eleanor could remember. It became a quiet obsession. She scoured old albums, combed through every photograph she could find, searching for a trace, a clue, a fragment that could explain the stranger's presence. But he was nowhere else. One rainy afternoon, Eleanor decided to confront her mother again. The rain tapped relentlessly against the windows, a staccato rhythm that matched the rapid beat of her heart. Her mother was seated at the table reading, a cup of tea steaming gently beside her. Eleanor placed the photograph down between them, the droplets from her jacket leaving dark rings on the wood. "Mom," she said, her voice steady, though her hands shook slightly. "Please, I need to know. Who is he?" Her mother's fingers tightened around the cup, the porcelain creaking faintly. She didn't look at Eleanor at first, her eyes fixed somewhere beyond the walls of the kitchen in a place Eleanor could not reach. Then finally, she spoke. "I told you. It's nothing," she murmured, but this time her voice had cracks in it, like old paint flaking under pressure. Some things are buried for a reason." Eleanor's chest tightened. But why would you hide him? What could be so important that it can't be talked about? Her mother's lips pressed into a thin line, and for a moment, Eleanor saw the woman she had once been, the young woman in the photograph, laughing freely, unburdened by secrets. Then the moment passed, replaced by the mother she knew, cautious, distant, protective. "You don't want to know," her mother said finally, a warning hidden beneath the surface of her words. "Some truths, they change everything. They can't be undone once you see them." Eleanor felt a surge of frustration, but also something sharper, something deeper, a gnawing curiosity she could not ignore. She had always believed that knowing your past was part of understanding who you were, but now she wondered if some pasts were meant to remain in shadows. That night, Eleanor sat in her room, the rain drumming against the window, and stared at the photograph once again. Her reflection in the glass overlapped with the stranger's smiling face, creating a ghostly double image. She felt a shiver run down her spine, as if he was watching her, silently, from beyond the frame. The question that had begun as a whisper in her mind had become a roar. Who was he? And why did her mother hide him? The next morning, Eleanor began to notice little things. Small gaps in the stories her mother told, photographs that seemed too carefully cropped, old letters tucked away in drawers that made no sense. It was as if the house itself had begun to reveal fragments of a puzzle she had not even known existed. The man in the photograph was not just a shadow in the past. He was a thread pulling at the seams of her mother's carefully constructed life. And Eleanor knew, with a certainty that made her pulse quicken, that she would follow that thread, no matter where it led, even if it tore the familiar world around her apart. The next day, Eleanor wandered the house with a sense of quiet purpose, as if the walls themselves were keeping secrets she had only just begun to hear. She moved from room to room, running her fingers along the spines of old books, lifting frames, peering behind drawers. Everything felt heavier now, charged with an unspoken significance. Even the sunlight filtering through the lace curtains seemed conspiratorial, casting shadows that twisted like fingers over the floorboards. She returned to the attic, drawn by a restless instinct she couldn't explain. The box of photographs sat where she had left it, the stranger's image perched on top like a silent sentinel. Eleanor's fingers shook as she dug deeper into the box, sorting through stacks of family snapshots, faded Polaroids, and old letters that smelled faintly of mothballs and old paper. She found a letter tucked into a manila envelope, its edges brittle and worn. The handwriting was unfamiliar, neat and deliberate, almost formal. The letter was unsigned, but it mentioned her mother, though not by name, and referenced a date decades ago, long before Eleanor was born. Her heart pounded. This was the first tangible proof that the man in the photograph had been more than a fleeting acquaintance. He had existed in her mother's life in a way that mattered. Eleanor's mind raced with questions. Why had her mother hidden him? And why now, after all these years, did the shadows of the past seem to be creeping back into her present? That evening, Eleanor tried again, approaching her mother with cautious determination. They sat at the dining table, the low hum of the refrigerator filling the silence between them. Eleanor placed the letter before her mother, watching the way her fingers twitched near the edge. Her mother's eyes flickered to the paper, and then away, the briefest shadow crossing her features. "I told you," she said softly, almost pleading. "Some things are better left alone." "But Mom," Eleanor's voice trembled despite herself. "I found a letter. He was important. I need to know." Her mother exhaled, a long, slow release of breath, as though carrying a weight too heavy to lift. She pushed her chair back slightly and stood, the dim light catching the lines of her face. "Eleanor, you don't understand. This isn't just about curiosity. Some truths, they're dangerous. They change how you see everything you love." Eleanor leaned forward, desperate. "But keeping it a secret doesn't protect me. It doesn't protect anyone. I need to know who he was." Her mother's gaze wavered, her resolve fraying. She sank back into the chair and pressed her palms to her face. When she spoke again, her voice was a whisper. He was part of a life I thought I had left behind. A life that didn't end the way it should have. I wanted to bury it so that you could grow up safe, without knowing the darkness that lingered around us. Eleanor's mind reeled. Darkness. Danger. The words were heavy, almost tangible, hanging in the air between them like smoke. She could see her mother's fear, but it was a fear cloaked in years of restraint, in careful silence. Eleanor's chest tightened. "Mom, I can handle the truth. I need the truth. Please." Her mother looked at her for a long moment, eyes glistening with unshed tears, and finally nodded. "There's a photograph," she said, her voice trembling. "A single photograph that changed everything. That's the only thing I can show you, for now." She led Eleanor to the back of the house, down a narrow hallway that smelled faintly of cedar and old paint. They stopped before a locked cabinet. Her mother retrieved a small key from around her neck, turned it in the lock, and opened the door. Inside, neatly stacked, were more photographs. Some black and white, some in sepia tones. But one photograph rested on top, clearly meant to be found. It was the same man, but younger, his expression serious this time, not smiling. He was standing next to her mother in what looked like a crowded train station, a letter in his hand, and her mother's eyes glinted with something Eleanor had never seen. Fear, or perhaps anticipation, or both. There was something unspoken between them, a tension that vibrated through the paper and into Eleanor's chest. "Who is he?" Eleanor whispered, though part of her already feared the answer. Her mother's fingers lingered over the edge of the photograph. He was part of something I thought I could control, but life had a way of turning the safest plans into chaos. Eleanor's mind raced. What could have been so dangerous that her mother's memory of him was buried behind walls and locked cabinets? She could see her mother's struggle, the effort to protect her, to shield her from a past that had evidently been violent, complicated, and impossible to explain in a single conversation. Determined, Eleanor began to probe gently, asking questions about her mother's early adulthood, friends she had had, places she had been. But her mother deflected each one with a practiced ease that belied the tension coiling beneath her skin. Eleanor noticed the subtle tells, the slight trembling of her mother's hands, the way her gaze flicked to the door as if expecting someone to appear, the faint tightening around her jaw when she spoke of certain events. Days turned into nights, and Eleanor's obsession with the photograph and its implications grew. She returned to the attic, combing through every box, every envelope, every scrap of paper that might hold a clue. She discovered a journal belonging to her mother, filled with entries from years before Eleanor's birth. The handwriting was hurried, almost frantic at times, the ink blotting in certain areas as if the writer's hand had trembled with fear or urgency. The journal referenced a man named Daniel, but never explicitly explained who he was or what had happened between him and her mother. Each entry added more questions than answers. There were hints of meetings in cities Eleanor had never heard of, mentions of warnings and threats, and passages that spoke of a love that had been both passionate and terrifying. Eleanor could feel the weight of her mother's past pressing in on her, each word a piece of a puzzle she was desperate to solve. The journal led Eleanor to a small abandoned cafe in the city, one her mother had mentioned in passing. The place was dark and silent, the windows streaked with rain, the chairs stacked upside down on tables as if no one had entered in years. Eleanor traced the worn wood with her fingers, imagining her mother there, young and alive, laughing, talking, planning. And then something shifting, something dark, intruding into that light. The cafe smelled faintly of coffee and dust, the kind of smell that clings to a place long after it's been abandoned. As Eleanor turned to leave, a folded piece of paper slipped from between the pages of the journal. She unfolded it, revealing an address and a date. Decades old but precise, specific, and undeniably real. Her pulse quickened. It was a clue, a tangible connection to a past she had only glimpsed in fragments. The man in the photograph, Daniel, had left traces behind, waiting for her to find them. Eleanor knew, in that moment, that the journey she had begun was no longer about curiosity. It was about truth. And truth, she realized with a chill that ran down her spine, had a way of changing everything. The next morning, the city streets were slick with rain, reflecting neon signs and streetlights like fractured mirrors. Eleanor clutched the folded paper she had found in the journal, the address and date burning in her mind. Her mother had always spoken of life as if it were a series of choices, carefully curated and shielded from chaos. But Eleanor now understood that choices could be buried, hidden behind years of silence, waiting for someone brave or reckless enough to unearth them. She hailed a taxi, her pulse quick, the weight of anticipation pressing on her chest. The address led her to a narrow street tucked away behind crumbling brick buildings, the kind of place that seemed to belong to another era entirely. A solitary street lamp flickered overhead, casting jagged shadows across the cracked pavement. The building at the end of the street looked abandoned. Its windows were darkened with grime, the faded letters above the doorway illegible. Eleanor hesitated, her hand resting lightly on the door frame. The air smelled faintly of rain and mildew, the kind of smell that clung to history and neglect. She pushed the door open. It creaked on rusty hinges, protesting against the intrusion. Inside, the space was silent, save for the faint drip of water from a leaky pipe. Dust motes danced in the slivers of sunlight cutting through the grime-streaked windows. The cafe she had imagined from her mother's journal was frozen in time. Tables were stacked, chairs upturned, coffee cups abandoned as if everyone had simply vanished mid-conversation. And yet, something felt deliberate, orchestrated, as though the past itself had been waiting for her to arrive. Eleanor moved cautiously, her fingers brushing over the worn wooden counter. Beneath it, tucked in a corner, she found a small notebook. It was leather-bound, the edges frayed. The pages were filled with handwriting she immediately recognized. Daniel's. Her breath caught. The entries were meticulous, detailed, full of observations about people and places, but every line carried an undercurrent of fear. Eleanor read the words carefully, each sentence painting a portrait of a man entangled in something far larger than she could have imagined. Daniel's entries spoke of meetings that went wrong, promises broken, shadows that seemed to follow him wherever he went. He wrote of her mother, never naming Eleanor, of course, but his words were vivid, full of emotion. He had loved her, but his love had been bound by danger, secrecy, and an inevitability that he couldn't escape. Eleanor's chest ached as she read, feeling the weight of the history she had only glimpsed in fragments. Suddenly, a noise shattered the quiet, a faint creak from the back door. Eleanor froze, her heart hammering. She had expected the cafe to be abandoned, yet she now realized she was not alone. A figure emerged from the shadows, tall, thin, and wearing a coat that seemed to swallow him in darkness. His face was obscured by a low hat, but his presence was commanding, almost predatory. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice low, cautious, but tinged with recognition. Eleanor swallowed hard. "Who are you?" she asked, trying to steady her voice. The man's eyes flicked toward the notebook in her hands. "That belongs to the past," he said, almost mournfully. "And some things are best left there. But I need to know," Eleanor insisted, stepping closer. "I need to understand. My mother, she's been hiding something all my life. Who was Daniel? What happened?" The man's gaze softened, and for a moment, Eleanor saw a flicker of something familiar, perhaps the same warmth her mother had once held for Daniel. "Daniel," he said slowly, as if tasting the name, was a good man caught in a storm he couldn't survive. "Your mother. She loved him, but she made choices to protect you, to protect herself. And sometimes, protection comes at a cost." Eleanor felt a mix of anger and desperation. But keeping it secret, living with lies, it's suffocating. I need to know everything. The man sighed, running a hand across his face. "You're braver than most. Or foolish. Perhaps both. Very well. But once you know, there's no turning back." He gestured for Eleanor to follow him. They exited the cafe into the rain-soaked streets, the city alive around them but feeling distant, muted, as if Eleanor had stepped into another world entirely. The man led her through twisting alleyways and abandoned courtyards until they arrived at a small apartment, its windows barred, the lights dim inside. Inside, Eleanor found herself surrounded by remnants of a life she had only imagined. Maps pinned to the walls, photographs of her mother and Daniel, newspaper clippings, and letters, all chronicling a world she had never known existed. The man, whose name she now learned was Marcus, explained slowly, carefully, filling in gaps that her mother had refused to touch. Daniel had been involved in a series of events that had drawn attention from dangerous individuals, people who operated in the shadows, whose motives were hidden behind layers of deception. Eleanor's mother had met him during a period of her life when she had been naive, vulnerable, and fiercely independent. Their relationship had been passionate, but it had drawn peril to their doorstep. In the end, her mother had chosen to sever all ties to bury Daniel and his existence from her future, shielding Eleanor from the danger that had stalked them. Eleanor listened, her chest tight, her mind racing. Every revelation added a layer to the tapestry of secrets that had been her family's life. She could feel the tension in the room, thick and suffocating, as Marcus spoke of choices made in desperation, of betrayals and sacrifices, and of the love that had been buried beneath fear. "You see," Marcus said finally, "sometimes the truth is not about comfort. It's about survival. Your mother did what she had to do. And Daniel, he didn't survive." Eleanor's hands trembled. She had expected to uncover mysteries, perhaps family secrets, but death? Danger? The stakes were far higher than she had imagined. She felt a cold emptiness settle in her stomach, a mixture of grief, anger, and disbelief. "Then, that photograph," she whispered. "That's all I have left of him?" Marcus nodded. "And now, perhaps all you need to do is understand why. Why some things must remain buried, why some truths are too heavy for the living to carry." But Eleanor felt a spark within her, a defiance, a refusal to leave the story incomplete. The puzzle was only half solved, and she could sense that the layers of her mother's past were far deeper than Marcus had yet revealed. She wasn't satisfied with fragments. She needed the whole truth, even if it shattered the world she had always known. That night, back in her room, Eleanor spread out every photograph, letter, and journal entry she had gathered. She traced the connections between them, following invisible lines, seeking the patterns that would reveal the story in its entirety. The man in the photograph, Daniel, was no longer a stranger. He was a key, a linchpin in the hidden narrative of her mother's life. And Eleanor knew that whatever she discovered next would change everything. The rain pattered against her window, relentless, unyielding, a rhythm that matched the pounding of her heart. And somewhere in the shadows of the city, Eleanor could feel the past waiting, patient, silent, and far more dangerous than she had yet imagined. The night had grown colder, the city outside Eleanor's window shrouded in mist and the hum of distant traffic. Sleep was impossible. Her mind raced with fragments of the past, photographs, letters, and Marcus's words weaving into a tapestry that was almost too heavy to bear. Eleanor knew that the truth of her mother's life, and Daniel's, was closer than ever, yet the final pieces remained frustratingly out of reach, teasing her with their absence. Determined, she returned to the small apartment Marcus had shown her, the leather-bound notebook clutched tightly under her arm. Marcus was waiting, his expression taut with caution, as though he already sensed the storm that was about to break. "You're ready," he said simply, and Eleanor nodded, though her stomach churned with a mixture of fear and anticipation. They moved through the apartment, past maps and photographs, stopping at a small locked drawer beneath a desk. Marcus retrieved another key, smaller than the first, and slid it into the lock. The drawer opened with a soft click, revealing a stack of letters, each one carefully folded and tied with a ribbon that had faded with age. Eleanor's hands shook as she reached for the top letter. Her breath caught in her throat. The letters were Daniel's, addressed to her mother, written during a period Eleanor had only glimpsed in journal entries and photographs. Reading them, Eleanor felt the depth of a love that was fierce, tender, and desperate all at once. Daniel had loved her mother with a devotion that bordered on obsession, yet he had been forced to navigate a world of threats and danger Eleanor could barely comprehend. Each letter was a plea, a warning, a confession of fear and hope intermingled, and then she found one that stopped her cold. Unlike the others, it was addressed to Eleanor herself, written decades before she was born. Daniel had known somehow that the life of the child her mother would bear could be affected by the shadows he and her mother had struggled to escape. The letter spoke of choices, of survival, of sacrifices that would protect her, but leave scars in the past. Eleanor's hands shook as tears blurred her vision. The man she had never known had thought of her long before she existed, his life entwined with hers even from afar. Marcus watched quietly, letting her absorb the weight of the revelation. "Your mother did everything she could to shield you," he said finally, his voice low. "But the truth, it always has a way of surfacing." Eleanor realized in that moment the magnitude of the story she had uncovered. It was more than a photograph, more than a hidden man from her mother's past. It was a story of love, danger, and survival that had shaped the woman her mother became, and, in turn, the life Eleanor had lived. Every smile, every decision, every small comfort had been influenced by the shadow of Daniel and the choices her mother had made to protect her. There had. With Marcus's guidance, Eleanor pieced together the remaining fragments. The cities her mother had fled to, the people she had trusted and feared, the narrow escapes from threats that had never touched Eleanor's sheltered life. Each revelation was a shock, a layer peeled back from the carefully constructed world she had taken for granted. Yet amidst the chaos of secrets, Eleanor felt a strange clarity. She understood, finally, the depth of her mother's courage, the complexity of love that could be as perilous as it was tender. Returning home, Eleanor placed the photographs, letters, and journal entries carefully on her desk, the weight of the past now tangible in the room. She approached her mother, who was sitting quietly in the living room, the evening sun casting warm shadows across the floor. Eleanor sat beside her, holding her mother's hand. "I understand now," she said softly. "Everything. Daniel. The letters. The dangers. I understand why you hid him. And I forgive you." Her mother's eyes glistened with tears, the kind that spoke of relief, pride, and sorrow all at once. "I wanted to protect you," she whispered, "to give you a life without fear. But I see now. You were always meant to find the truth." For a long moment, they sat together in silence, the past and present coalescing into an understanding neither had dared hope for. Eleanor felt a mixture of grief and gratitude, awe at the bravery her mother had carried silently for decades. The shadows of the past still lingered, but for the first time, they were not threatening. They were a part of the story, a legacy of love, loss, and survival. As Eleanor looked at the photographs one final time, the image of Daniel smiling next to her mother, she felt a strange peace. She realized that the truth, while heavy, had given her a connection to the people she had never known, and a deeper understanding of the life she had always lived. It was a revelation that reshaped her perception of family, love, and the hidden threads that tie generations together. And in that quiet, reflective moment, Eleanor asked herself questions that would linger in the minds of anyone who had followed her journey. How much of our parents' pasts should we uncover? Do the secrets we keep protect, or do they imprison? And when the shadows of history finally surface, what responsibility do we bear toward the truth, toward the people who lived it, and toward ourselves? These were the questions Eleanor carried with her as she stepped into the night, the photograph in her hand, and the understanding that some truths, though buried for decades, have the power to define not only the past, but the present, and shape the person you are meant to become. My partner forgot my birthday this year. I tried to brush it off, but the hurt lingers. Everyone else seems to think I'm overreacting, but I feel invisible. It's not about gifts. It's about feeling valued. I want to talk to them, but I also fear I'm making a mountain out of a molehill. How do you communicate your feelings without making the other person feel attacked? The apartment was quiet, the kind of quiet that presses against the ears, making every creak of the floorboards feel louder than it had any right to be. Outside, rain drummed gently against the windows, a soft rhythm that somehow made the silence inside more pronounced. Inside, Elena sat on the edge of the couch, her hands folded loosely in her lap, staring at the coffee table. It was littered with small remnants of the morning: an empty coffee cup, a half-eaten granola bar, a notebook with pages curling at the edges, and a single, unopened birthday card she hadn't even meant to check yet. She had tried to push it down, that gnawing sense of disappointment, that quiet sting of being unseen, unremembered. She had told herself all day that it didn't matter, that it was just a date, that birthdays were arbitrary constructs in the grand scheme of life. But the truth lodged itself stubbornly in her chest. It wasn't about the cake, the candles, the presents. It was about recognition, about someone she loved, remembering that she existed, that she mattered. Across the room, the apartment felt almost foreign, even though she had lived there for 3 years. Every corner was familiar, every shadow cast by the evening light known. Yet tonight, it felt different, hollow. It was as if the walls themselves had absorbed the tension and disappointment, muting the warmth that should have been there. Elena's partner, Daniel, was in the kitchen. She could hear him moving around. The subtle scrape of a knife against a cutting board, the faint hum of the refrigerator, and the occasional soft curse under his breath. He had tried to play it off this morning, saying work had been busy, that he had something planned for the evening, that it would all be fine. But his tone hadn't convinced her, and now, as she sat waiting, she realized she wasn't sure she even wanted him to try. She remembered the moment she had woken up that morning. She had peeked at her phone before even opening her eyes, a habitual check, a ritual of comfort. Her heart had jumped at first, thinking perhaps he had left a sweet message, a small reminder. But there was nothing, just the usual notifications, emails, messages from friends, and the endless scrolling updates from social media. Her birthday, her special day, had passed unnoticed, at least in the digital realm where she usually found acknowledgement. And yet, she didn't want to confront him immediately. She wanted to hold it together, to appear calm, reasonable, not hysterical or ungrateful. But as the hours passed, every tick of the clock, every minor sound in the apartment seemed amplified. The brush of Daniel's footsteps across the floor felt deliberate, though she knew it wasn't. Her chest tightened, the kind of anxiety that made her fingers tingle and her stomach twist into knots. Finally, she stood, moving to the window. Rain streaked down the glass, distorting the city lights outside into long, trembling streaks of color, neon blues, reds, and the occasional white of a passing car's headlights. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass, drawing a shaky breath, trying to ground herself. Why did this feel like more than just forgetting a birthday? She couldn't articulate it fully, but it felt like a deeper fracture, like an invisibility that had been there all along, now amplified and undeniable. Daniel entered the room then, carrying 2 mugs of steaming coffee. He smiled, the way he always did, casual, easy, like the air around him didn't carry the weight of unspoken guilt. "Here," he said, holding one out to her. "Thought you could use a little caffeine." She accepted the mug, letting it warm her hands, though the warmth did nothing for the cold ache inside her. "Thanks," she said softly. He sat down beside her, his presence normally comforting, grounding, but now it felt heavy, almost suffocating. There was a hesitation in the air, an unspoken tension neither of them wanted to address yet. She wanted to speak, to articulate the swirling storm in her chest, but the words felt brittle on her tongue. Any moment she tried to frame them, they broke, scattered, inadequate. "You okay?" he asked, finally breaking the silence. His tone carried a thread of concern, but also the subtle defensiveness of someone sensing impending confrontation. She nodded, though it was the sort of nod that meant little. "Yeah," she said. "Just thinking." He leaned back, studying her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Was it worry? Guilt? or just the casual attentiveness of someone unsure what to say? Thinking about work? He ventured, trying to bridge the chasm that had opened between them. She shook her head. No, just life. Her voice was quiet, almost drowned out by the rain, but it was deliberate. She was trying to measure each word, to gauge the impact before releasing it. Daniel smiled faintly. Life can be overwhelming sometimes. He took a sip of his coffee, then set it down carefully on the table, avoiding the stack of papers and notebooks that littered it. But hey, it's Friday. We've made it through the week. She wanted to say something sharp, something that would articulate the sting of being forgotten, the invisible wound that had been inflicted without malice, yet hurt all the same. But she didn't. Instead, she turned away, focusing on the rain-soaked streets below, on the blur of cars and umbrellas and hurried figures. She envied them, their purpose, their clarity, their ability to move forward without being trapped in a private spiral of hurt. Hours passed, the kind of slow, dragging time that made every second feel like an accusation. Dinner was quiet, punctuated by the clatter of cutlery and the occasional awkward exchange about the mundane details of the day. Daniel tried to lighten the mood with a joke about a coworker, something trivial and inconsequential, but Elena could only force a polite smile. Laughter felt impossible, alien, a performance she wasn't ready to enact. Later, as they moved to the living room, she found herself standing near the doorway, hesitant. Daniel had settled on the couch, scrolling on his phone, and for a moment she considered leaving it, letting the day end without confrontation. But the weight of unspoken words pressed down, relentless, demanding acknowledgement. We need to talk, she said finally, her voice trembling despite her efforts to steady it. He looked up, startled, eyes widening slightly. There was no anger, no immediate defensiveness, just a flicker of uncertainty. Yeah? He asked cautiously. She nodded, taking a deep breath, the kind that felt like it might pull something loose inside her. About today, she said. About my birthday. His brow furrowed, a brief shadow passing over his features. Oh. She held up a hand, stopping him. No, I don't want excuses. I need you to understand how it made me feel. Daniel set his phone aside, giving her his full attention now, and she realized that the moment had finally arrived, the long-awaited confrontation that had hovered over the day, threatening to crash down. The apartment felt smaller suddenly, the walls pressing in as though they too were listening, waiting for what would come next. She spoke then, slowly, deliberately, choosing her words like fragile objects. It wasn't the gift, or the celebration. It was the fact that you forgot, that you didn't see it. I felt invisible. The words hung in the air, heavy, unavoidable. Daniel's face softened, guilt flickering in his eyes, but there was something else there too. A hesitation, a tension that suggested this was only the beginning. And in that quiet, charged room, with rain streaking the windows and the city lights shimmering like distant stars, Elena realized that nothing would ever be quite the same. The fracture had been revealed, subtle, but undeniable. And the next steps, what she would say, what he would say, what they would do, would determine whether the bond between them could survive this invisible wound. Outside, the storm continued to fall, rhythmic and unrelenting, a reminder that even in the quietest moments, the world moved forward, indifferent, unstoppable, carrying both hope and heartbreak in its wake. The night deepened outside, the rain now heavier, pounding against the window panes with insistent force, making the apartment feel both isolated and confining. Elena stood near the edge of the living room, her arms crossed loosely, though the tremor in her hands betrayed her attempt at composure. Daniel, seated on the couch, watched her cautiously, his fingers tapping lightly against the mug he still held. He hadn't spoken for several minutes, as though weighing every word before it escaped his lips. Yet she could feel the tension radiating from him in subtle pulses, almost tactile, like an unspoken heartbeat syncing with her own. Finally, he spoke, quiet, deliberate, almost a whisper in the charged space. "Elena, I didn't know you'd feel this way." His eyes avoided hers, scanning the floor between them, tracing the patterns of shadows cast by the lamplight. She wanted to shout, to demand acknowledgement, but instead she took a step closer, her voice low but firm. "It's not just today, Daniel. It's the pattern. The way I feel sometimes. Invisible. Forgotten. Like my presence doesn't matter. Like I'm optional in the background of your life." He flinched slightly, the words landing with a weight heavier than any physical blow. He opened his mouth, closed it, and then leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. I didn't mean to make you feel that way," he admitted, his voice tinged with shame, but there was also defensiveness there, subtle, almost imperceptible. "You know I care about you, right? I show it. I do things, small things. I thought maybe you didn't notice." Elena shook her head, letting the movement be small but sharp, the rain casting streaked shadows across her face, accentuating the flush of anger and hurt. "It's not about noticing, Daniel. It's about remembering. It's about making me feel like I matter, like I'm seen, not just present. Do you understand that?" Daniel's gaze finally met hers, and for a moment, it was as if the room contracted, squeezing them both into a narrow, invisible cage of raw emotion. I think I do," he said, though his uncertainty betrayed him. I didn't mean to hurt you." She sighed, letting her shoulders slump slightly, the tension easing but not vanishing. Her eyes drifted to the window, to the streaked city lights distorted by the rain. "It's not about meaning to hurt me, Daniel. It's not about intentions. It's about impact. The way your absence, your forgetting, echoes in my head all day. Makes me question everything." A long silence followed. Daniel leaned back against the couch, hands clasped together, staring at the floor. His breathing was steady, controlled, yet his knuckles were white where they gripped one another. I didn't realize it was that serious. I thought maybe you'd brush it off or we'd celebrate later. I didn't know it had already hurt you this much." Elena moved closer, the sound of her footsteps soft against the hardwood, each step deliberate. She stopped just short of him, the small distance between them charged, fragile, precarious. "It's not just about this day. It's about a lifetime of moments that pass unmarked, unnoticed. Sometimes it's subtle, sometimes it's loud, but it's always there, and today just made it undeniable." He shifted in his seat, suddenly restless, as if the weight of her words had pressed him to the edge of something unnameable. I don't know what to say," he admitted, voice tight. "I love you, Elena. I thought you knew that. I thought maybe that was enough." She felt a pang, a combination of sorrow and disbelief. Love. That word, so often repeated, so often assumed, now seemed fragile, insufficient. "Love isn't enough," she said softly, shaking her head, "not when it comes without attention, without acknowledgement. Not when it comes with forgetting the small things that matter." He sat in silence, the storm outside intensifying, the rain now hammering the roof and windows with an almost violent rhythm. The sound mirrored the tempest inside her, the storm of words unspoken, feelings unacknowledged, the ache of invisibility. He finally exhaled, slow, deliberate, the air heavy with unshed emotion. "So, what do we do now?" he asked. The question hung between them like a fragile truce, uncertain and tentative. Elena's gaze remained fixed on the window. She could feel the city outside moving on, indifferent, unstoppable, just as she had that morning when she had checked her phone. "We talk," she said finally, turning to him, her eyes fierce, vulnerable, pleading all at once. "We really talk. No excuses. No deflection. No pretending it's not serious. We have to confront this, or it doesn't go away." He nodded slowly, swallowing, as if the act itself required effort. "Okay," he said. "Okay, I want to understand. I want to fix this. I don't want you to feel invisible." Elena hesitated for a moment, her fingers brushing against the armrest of the couch, as if seeking some anchor. "It's not just about me feeling invisible, Daniel. It's about the ways we hurt each other without realizing. The small, constant neglects that accumulate until they feel like mountains. I need you to see that, to really see it." He leaned back, silent, thoughtful. Then, in a voice low and uncertain, he asked the question that neither of them wanted to confront directly. "Do you sometimes feel like I don't care at all?" Her throat tightened, the words sticking like stones. "Sometimes," she admitted quietly, almost a whisper. "Sometimes I wonder if the person I love sees me at all, or if I'm just part of the scenery. Not the foreground, not the story, just the background noise." He exhaled sharply, rubbing his face with one hand, the tension in his shoulders visible even in the dim lamplight. "Elena, I don't know what to say. I do care. I don't always know how to show it the way you need me to." She stepped back slightly, running a hand through her hair, the tension leaving a line of heat across her scalp. "That's the thing, Daniel. You don't have to know. You just have to try. You have to pay attention. You have to see me. That's all I ask." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and for the first time that evening she saw something flicker in his expression, a mixture of guilt, fear, and something deeper, something she couldn't quite place, a shadow, fleeting, but unmistakable. I'll try," he said finally, his voice barely above the sound of the rain. "I don't want to hurt you like this ever again. I'll try." For a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. Even the rain outside seemed to soften, the rhythm slowing, allowing a fragile pause in the chaos. Elena wanted to believe him, to trust the promise, to feel the warmth of reassurance that had eluded her all day. But beneath the surface, a knot of unease remained, stubborn, insistent. She had seen this before. Promises made in the glow of guilt, meant to soothe, meant to stop the immediate pain, but often fleeting, temporary, fragile. The night stretched on. They sat together in silence, each absorbed in their own thoughts, the storm outside echoing the turbulence within. Elena's mind wandered to memories she had buried, the small slights, the forgotten anniversaries, the overlooked milestones. Each one, tiny on its own, had accumulated into a quiet roar that now pressed against the edges of her consciousness. She wondered if Daniel even remembered them all, or if they were just invisible marks on her life, unnoticed and unvalued. Then a sudden sound shattered the fragile calm, a sharp knock at the door. They both startled, the tension spiking instantly. The knock came again. Urgent, insistent. Daniel frowned, glancing at her, confused. Who? Elena shook her head, a sudden unease curling in her stomach. She moved cautiously toward the door, each step measured, the apartment suddenly feeling unfamiliar, as though the walls had shifted while they were distracted. Through the peephole, she saw nothing, just the rain-slick hallway beyond, empty, desolate. She opened the door slowly, heart pounding. No one. Just the faint sound of dripping water echoing down the corridor. She stepped outside cautiously, peering into the darkness, but the hallway was empty. When she returned, Daniel's expression was unreadable, tight-lipped. Probably just someone delivering something. Maybe a package, he said, though the uncertainty in his voice betrayed him. Elena nodded, but the unease lingered. Something about the knock, the emptiness, the timing. It felt deliberate, as though it had been placed there to disrupt the fragile truce between them. She shook the thought away, forcing herself to focus on the immediate tension in the room, on the unresolved feelings still hanging between them. And as they returned to the couch, both aware that this night was far from over, neither of them realized that the ripple set in motion by a forgotten birthday had already begun to spread, touching corners of their lives neither had anticipated, carrying secrets, surprises, and the promise of revelations that would change everything. The apartment felt smaller now, as if the air itself had thickened, pressing against Elena and Daniel with an invisible weight. The rain outside had slowed to a steady drizzle, yet the storm within the walls seemed far from over. Elena sat back on the couch, wrapping her arms around herself, trying to steady her breathing. The knock at the door, unexpected, unexplained, lingered in her mind, a shadow that refused to dissipate. Daniel, sensing her unease, reached out, resting a tentative hand on her knee. She flinched slightly at the contact, not out of anger, but from the raw nerve of vulnerability that had been exposed over the past hours. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly, the rain's faint patter against the window filling the silence between his words. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice tight. "I think I'm scared, Daniel. Not just about today, but about us. About everything that's been left unsaid. About all the small things that accumulate and suddenly feel impossible to ignore." He nodded, his gaze dropping to the floor. "I get it. I really do. I've been blind in some ways. I thought I was showing care, but maybe I was just going through the motions." She wanted to believe him, desperately wanted to. But a shadow lingered in her chest, a sense that this moment of revelation was only a surface ripple, not the depth of the ocean beneath. "It's not just motions," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's absence, Daniel. Absence dressed up as normalcy, as daily routine. It accumulates, and then—" She hesitated, unable to articulate the storm inside. "Then it feels like you're a stranger living in the same space as me." He swallowed, visibly shaken, a tightness in his jaw, his fingers gripping the edge of the couch. I don't want that. I don't want to be a stranger to you." For a long moment, the two sat in tense silence, broken only by the occasional patter of rain and the faint hum of the refrigerator. Then, without warning, the lights flickered, plunging the apartment into a dim half-darkness before returning. Elena jumped slightly, the sudden shift of light amplifying her nerves. Daniel's eyes narrowed, scanning the room with a fleeting suspicion that made him look almost unrecognizable. "It's just the storm," he said, though the hesitation in his voice betrayed the casualness of the statement. Elena nodded, yet her senses were on high alert now. The knock, the sudden darkness, the building tension between them, it all felt like part of some unspoken script she couldn't read. Her mind wandered to the day's earlier conversations, to the words they had exchanged, to the fragile trust she had begun to rebuild, and she realized just how delicate the thread between them really was. One wrong word, one small misstep, could undo hours of careful navigation. "I need some air," she said abruptly, rising from the couch. She moved to the balcony door, pulling it open. The night air was cool, tinged with the smell of wet asphalt and ozone, carrying the distant hum of the city. Elena leaned against the railing, letting the breeze wash over her, trying to shake the restless energy coiling in her chest. The streets below were slick, reflections of streetlights glimmering in puddles, and the occasional figure darted past under umbrellas, unaware of the storm, both literal and metaphorical, unfolding above them. Daniel joined her, hands in his pockets, hesitant. "You want to talk more out here?" he asked softly, his breath forming faint clouds in the cool air. She shook her head, her gaze fixed on the street below. "No. I just need to think. I need to understand why this hurts so much, why it feels like my existence can be forgotten so easily." He nodded slowly, not pressing, but the tension in his posture was palpable. "I didn't know it could hurt this much," he admitted. "I thought maybe it was just a day and we'd celebrate later. I didn't realize how deep this went." Elena turned to him then, the moonlight catching the edges of her face, accentuating the vulnerability and resolve that coexisted there. "It's not just today, Daniel. It's everything. The small omissions, the forgettings, the times I've reached out and felt unseen. Today just made it undeniable." He exhaled, a shuddering sound carried away by the night breeze. "Then we fix it," he said quietly, though his voice trembled with uncertainty. We really talk. No excuses, no distractions." She wanted to believe him, but a lingering doubt gnawed at her. The night, the storm, the flicker of light, everything felt like it carried meaning, signals she couldn't decipher. Her gaze drifted back toward the city, and that's when she saw it. A shadow moving in the alley across the street, just at the edge of visibility. At first she thought it was someone passing by, but then it lingered, shifting, almost deliberate. "Elena?" Daniel's voice startled her, pulling her attention back. "What is it?" She pointed faintly toward the alley. "Someone. I think they're watching." He squinted, trying to make out what she was pointing at. The figure seemed to vanish, swallowed by darkness and distance, leaving only an unsettling emptiness. "It's probably nothing," he said, though his fingers tightened in his pockets. "Maybe just someone passing." But Elena didn't move her eyes. Something in that fleeting silhouette, the timing, the way it had appeared at the precise moment their tension peaked, made her heart hammer. A shiver ran down her spine as the sense of being observed deepened the unease that had been building all evening. Returning inside, the apartment felt alien again, the shadows longer, the silence heavier. Elena sat back on the couch, trying to steady her racing thoughts. She told herself it was her imagination, that the night and the storm and the unresolved conflict had created a hallucination of presence. Yet the gnawing suspicion remained, an itch she couldn't scratch away. Daniel, too, seemed unsettled, pacing the small living space, running a hand through his hair. "Maybe we should just ignore it," he suggested, voice low. "Focus on us, on fixing what's broken." Elena shook her head slowly, a frown knitting her brows. "Ignoring it won't make it go away. Something is off tonight. I feel it. And I think maybe it's tied to the way we've been avoiding the bigger truths." He paused, staring at her. "Bigger truths?" She hesitated, the words thick in her throat. The things we never say. The things we hide from each other. From ourselves. The fears we bury until they manifest in moments like this. Daniel sank back into the couch, his shoulders slumping, the tension of hours finally breaking into something raw and vulnerable. I don't even know where to start, he admitted. I feel like there's so much I should have said already, but I didn't. And now, everything's tangled. Elena reached for his hand, finally bridging the space between them. Then we start now, she said softly. No more hiding. No more pretending it's just a day or just a storm or just a knock at the door. Everything matters. And if we can't face it, if we can't be honest, then we can't move forward. For a moment they sat in silence, hands clasped. The storm outside now a gentle whisper. The city lights a soft glow in the distance. And yet, beneath the fragile calm, an undercurrent of tension persisted. A silent promise that the night was far from over, that the ripples of forgotten moments, hidden fears, and unseen watchers had only begun to reveal themselves. Then, without warning, the faint sound of a phone vibrating on the table pierced the quiet. Elena's heart skipped a beat as Daniel reached for it, reading the screen and freezing. His eyes widened, a flash of panic crossing his features, though the light from the phone screen was too dim to reveal the full expression. It's her, he said finally, voice tight. I didn't expect her to contact me tonight. Elena frowned, uneasy. Her? Daniel's fingers trembled as he set the phone down. Someone. From my past. I thought I had left this behind. A chill ran down Elena's spine. The tension, the knock at the door, the shadow in the alley. It suddenly didn't feel coincidental. Something had been following them, watching, waiting for cracks to appear. And now, the past was reaching in, threatening to shatter the fragile truce they had barely begun to forge. Elena's mind raced, connecting dots she wasn't sure even existed. The storm, the forgetfulness, the isolation of the night. It was all converging, leading to a revelation that neither of them could yet comprehend. And in that charged, rain-drenched apartment, with the city sprawling silently below, Elena realized that tonight would not just be about a birthday forgotten. It would be about truth, betrayal, and the secrets that had been quietly waiting for the perfect moment to emerge. The apartment had grown colder, though the air conditioning hadn't changed. Elena hugged herself tightly, her gaze darting between Daniel and the dimly lit window. Outside, the rain had slowed to a drizzle, leaving streaks along the glass that distorted the city lights into a blur of golds and blues. Every sound, Daniel's shallow breaths, the faint hum of the refrigerator, the occasional distant car horn, felt amplified, part of an invisible soundtrack designed to underscore the tension in the room. Daniel stared at the phone on the coffee table, his fingers hovering above it like he feared touching a live wire. I should have told you, he said finally, voice tight, almost brittle. But I thought it didn't matter. That it was just the past. Elena's eyes narrowed, a mixture of curiosity, suspicion, and fear intertwining. The past? She asked. Who is she? He flinched at the directness of the question. Someone I used to know. Someone I thought I had left behind. I didn't think she would contact me. Not tonight. Not like this. A quiet unease settled in Elena's chest, heavier than any she had felt earlier in the night. The knock at the door, the shadow in the alley, now the mysterious message. They weren't coincidences. Something was unraveling, and she wasn't sure if it was the storm outside or the secrets that Daniel had carried silently into their relationship. Did she say? Elena asked, voice steady but cold. Daniel hesitated, His lips pressed into a thin line. She reminded me of a promise I made. A long time ago. Something I thought I'd buried. Something I thought I had resolved. Elena's stomach twisted. A promise? He nodded slowly. Yes, to her. And I never intended to keep it, but it's resurfaced now. Tonight. On your birthday. I didn't want this to happen, I swear. But it's here. It's real. The room felt smaller, as if the walls themselves leaned closer, pressing in, listening. Elena's mind raced, trying to reconcile the man she had spent years loving with the shadowed presence now intruding on their fragile moment. So, this is why I felt invisible? She asked softly, the words trembling. Because a part of you was never really here? Daniel's eyes glistened with unshed tears. No, he said quickly, desperate. It's not like that. I was here. I am here, but I wasn't prepared for this. I didn't expect her to reach out. I didn't know how to tell you. I thought I could protect us, protect you, by keeping it buried. Elena sank into the couch, covering her face with her hands. The emotional weight of the night pressed down, mingling grief, betrayal, and the lingering ache of being forgotten. You think protecting me means hiding things from me? She asked quietly, her voice breaking. Do you understand what it feels like to feel invisible in your own life? To watch someone else take precedence over the bond you thought was real? Daniel knelt beside her, his hand gently touching her shoulder. I don't know if I can undo the hurt I caused, but I can promise you this. I will not let the past shadow our future. I don't want it to. I love you. You are my life, Elena, and I want to prove it. Not just in words, but in every moment from now on. Her breath hitched. She wanted to believe him, to feel that the cracks between them could be mended. But deep inside, a seed of doubt had taken root, one that whispered questions she couldn't ignore. How long had this been buried? How much had she unknowingly missed? And could the truth, once revealed, ever truly be reconciled with the life she thought she had? For the next few hours they talked, truly talked, delving into the past, into the secrets, into the fears and insecurities that had lain dormant. The apartment, once heavy with silence and tension, now seemed charged with a fragile energy, a mix of hope and unease. The rain had stopped entirely, leaving the night crisp and quiet, but the emotional storm inside them had only just begun to settle. Elena finally rested her head against Daniel's shoulder, exhausted, yet unwilling to let the vulnerability fade. We'll never be the same after tonight, she murmured. No, Daniel agreed, and maybe we shouldn't be. But at least we'll be honest. At least we'll face it together. The city outside seemed softer now, the streets glimmering with reflections of distant neon lights. The apartment, though still carrying the echoes of tension, felt a little less like a cage, and more like a space where truth, raw and unfiltered, could finally exist. Yet, as Elena closed her eyes, she couldn't help but wonder about the fragility of trust, the weight of hidden truths, and the invisible threads that connect, or unravel, the people we love. She thought about the shadows in the alley, the mysterious knock, the resurfacing past, and realized that life often places us in moments that demand clarity, courage, and the willingness to confront the uncomfortable, the painful, and the uncertain. And as the night stretched on, she asked herself, and perhaps silently challenged the audience, how often do we allow small omissions, overlooked moments, and unspoken truths to accumulate until they threaten to undo what we cherish most? Can love survive the shadows of the past? Or are some secrets too heavy to bear? When we feel invisible, is it the world failing to see us, or ourselves, failing to recognize our own worth in the spaces we inhabit? And finally, when confronted with betrayal or forgetfulness, do we hold on, forgive, or walk away? Truly walk away. From what we once believed could last forever, after years of hard work, I expected a promotion at my company. It went to someone younger, less experienced, and new to the team. Everyone congratulated them while I smiled politely. I feel invisible, resentful, and demoralized. How do you stay motivated when the world seems to reward favoritism over effort? Rain fell in a steady, unrelenting rhythm, tapping against the wide glass windows of the towering office building, drumming a monotonous beat that seemed to echo every suppressed thought in Nathan Hale's mind. Inside, the fluorescent lights cast a cold, clinical glow across the polished floors, reflecting off the endless rows of cubicles like 1,000 tiny mirrors, each holding a reflection of ambition and exhaustion. Nathan sat at his desk, hands clasped loosely over a keyboard that had been idle for nearly an hour, staring blankly at a spreadsheet that now seemed meaningless, every column and row reduced to symbols without purpose. He could feel the weight of the day pressing on him, a heaviness that was not physical, but existential. It was the weight of invisibility, of effort unnoticed, and of recognition stolen. Weeks ago, he had felt a spark of hope. After years of climbing, of sacrificing weekends and personal time, of working through exhaustion that left him breathless yet determined, he had quietly expected the nod of approval, the title change, the promotion that had always seemed within reach. He had envisioned the congratulatory smiles, the subtle acknowledgement from management, the sense that someone had finally noticed the blood, sweat, and tears he had poured into the company. But that recognition had never come. Instead, the promotion went to a new face, a young, charming, impeccably polished newcomer who had joined the team only months earlier. Someone whose resume, though decent, lacked the depth and experience Nathan had spent years cultivating. Nathan had smiled politely at the announcement, as everyone did, as he had rehearsed in his mind 1,000 times. He had nodded, muttered something along the lines of congratulations, and returned to his desk, hiding the storm raging behind his eyes. It was a performance he had perfected over the years, a careful dance of social politeness and emotional containment. But inside, the anger, the resentment, and the hurt throbbed with an intensity he could barely contain. He felt not just overlooked, but erased, as if every late night, every extra mile, every project completed beyond expectation had been invisible. And in that moment he wondered bitterly if effort alone ever mattered, in a world that rewarded charm, timing, and the whims of favoritism. The office around him moved with the familiar rhythm of routine. Phones rang, printers whirred, and colleagues spoke in low tones, their words blending into a soft, indistinct hum. Yet in the midst of this orchestrated chaos, Nathan felt utterly alone. His mind wandered to the early mornings, to the nights spent hunched over reports and presentations, the lunch hours sacrificed to client meetings and deadlines that never seemed to end. All of it, he realized, had led to a single, unremarkable truth. The world did not care. Recognition was fleeting. Effort was a currency that rarely bought respect. He remembered the look on the new hire's face during the announcement. Bright-eyed, smiling, a little nervous perhaps, but confident in the way only someone untested can be. There had been genuine applause, warm congratulations, a small cake brought in by HR to commemorate the occasion. Nathan had clapped along, nodded, and muttered polite words, but he could feel the hollow echo of his own acknowledgement. The smiles of others seemed to mock him rather than comfort him. Every congratulations was a reminder that he was now irrelevant in the eyes of the organization he had given so much to. Nathan's phone vibrated on the desk, jolting him from his spiral of thought. A message from his colleague, Claire, appeared on the screen. "Hey, lunch today. You look like you need a break." He stared at it for a long moment, fingers hovering, unsure whether to respond. He wanted to say yes, to escape the oppressive silence of the cubicle and the suffocating feeling of invisibility. But the words felt heavy, and the weight of what had just transpired in the office made every action seem meaningless. After a moment, he typed a quick reply. "Not today. Thanks, though." And he pressed send. The phone slipped back onto the desk as if it, too, understood the futility of the moment. As the rain continued to fall, Nathan found himself drawn to the windows, staring out at the city below. The streets gleamed with wet reflections of neon signs and the occasional headlights of cars cutting through the gloom. People moved with purpose, umbrellas bobbing like small sentinels in the gray wash of rain. Nathan's reflection merged with the scene outside, a ghostly overlay on the world beyond the glass. He felt a strange separation from it, as though he were watching life from behind a pane of invisible glass, never quite part of the flow of existence, never quite acknowledged. And yet, beneath the resentment, there was a spark, a subtle, flickering ember of something he could not yet name. It was the ember of awareness, of realization that the world might not reward effort, but survival, adaptation, and cunning could still shift the balance. The afternoon passed in a blur. Meetings came and went. The new hire continued to charm the team, and Nathan moved through the motions, a spectator to his own life. He noticed the way people deferred to the newcomer, their voices softer, their attention more focused. Every small interaction felt like a quiet betrayal, a reminder that his presence was no longer essential. He felt the familiar pang of envy mixed with incredulity. How could someone so new, so inexperienced, so untested, claim the accolades he had earned? And yet, the answer was obvious. The world, he realized, was rarely fair, and merit often mattered less than perception. By the time Nathan left the office that evening, the rain had stopped, leaving behind slick streets and the faint scent of ozone. He walked slowly, boots splashing through shallow puddles, eyes fixed on the asphalt, each step echoing his inner turmoil. The city hummed around him, indifferent to his plight, a vast machine of lives intersecting and diverging without regard for individual suffering. He felt small, insignificant, yet undeniably alive in the churning of emotions that made his chest ache with a mixture of grief and resolve. At home, Nathan poured a glass of whiskey, the amber liquid catching the soft light of his apartment. He sat by the window, swirling the drink, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. The warmth of the alcohol spread slowly through him, a temporary balm for the raw edges of his emotions. And yet, even in that quiet, isolated space, he could not escape the gnawing question. How does one remain motivated when the world seems to reward favoritism over effort? How does one continue to pour heart and soul into something that does not see or value it? His thoughts drifted back to the projects he had completed, the presentations he had delivered, the crises he had managed with unwavering calm. Every success, every moment of excellence now seemed to hang in the air like a ghost, unseen, uncelebrated, and ultimately meaningless in the eyes of those who held the power to reward. He felt a surge of bitterness, followed by a strange, almost desperate curiosity. Perhaps, he thought, the answer was not to fight for recognition within the confines of this system, but to understand it, to observe it, and to learn its hidden rules. Perhaps the world's injustice could be turned into advantage, if one only dared to see clearly. And so, Nathan sat there, swirling the whiskey, feeling the tension in his shoulders slowly unwind, a plan beginning to take shape in the quiet recesses of his mind. The anger was still there, simmering, but it was tempered now by focus. The night stretched ahead, silent except for the occasional distant siren, and he realized that tomorrow, and the day after, and the days that would follow, he would need to navigate the treacherous waters of a system that did not play fair. He would need to be patient, cunning, and unrelenting. The world might reward charm over effort, favoritism over skill, but perhaps there were ways to tilt that balance if one had the will and the vision. As he finally set the glass down and allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection, Nathan felt a subtle shift within. The hurt was still there, raw and undeniable, but beneath it, a sense of purpose began to grow. A flicker of something darker and sharper than simple ambition. It was not revenge exactly, though it hovered near. It was awareness, clarity, and a quiet determination that he would not remain invisible. He would find a way to be seen, to reclaim agency, to turn the tide in a game that seemed rigged. And perhaps he realized the journey itself would reveal truths about himself and the world that he had never before considered. Outside, the city lights continued to shimmer through the night. The rain had left everything slick and reflective, a mirror for possibilities, yet unrealized. Nathan's reflection merged with the urban landscape, a solitary figure standing at the intersection of frustration and resolve. And somewhere deep inside, where anger met clarity, he felt the faintest spark of anticipation, a sense that the world, for all its unfairness, was about to reveal its secrets, and that he was ready to confront them. Morning arrived, like a reluctant intruder, sliding pale light through Nathan's blinds and illuminating the faint streaks of condensation that had gathered overnight. He lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, mind racing with fragments of plans and scenarios, each more intricate than the last. Sleep had fled him, leaving only a restless, gnawing awareness that the world outside continued to turn without regard for his sense of justice. Every tick of the clock seemed to echo the unspoken question that haunted him. What would it take to be seen? Not just noticed, but respected, feared, or at least acknowledged in a way that could not be ignored. He dressed in his usual office attire, gray slacks, a crisp white shirt, tie loosened at the collar, shoes polished to a reflective shine. But today the routine felt performative, almost ritualistic. He stepped into the elevator, its metallic walls reflecting his tense, pale face. The other occupants were absorbed in their devices, scrolling through news, emails, messages that held no consequence for Nathan. Yet he felt their presence like a subtle vibration, a reminder that he was part of a larger organism, yet tangibly separate. In the lobby, the rain had left the pavement glistening, puddles mirroring the jagged skyline. He paused briefly to watch a taxi splash through a shallow puddle, the water sending a sharp spray into the air. A moment of chaos mirrored in miniature, and for a fraction of a second, he imagined the splash as a metaphor for the disruption he planned to introduce into his own stagnant life. Inside the office, the atmosphere had shifted. The promotion celebration was over, but its echoes lingered like a stubborn scent. The team moved with subdued energy, a mix of forced productivity and polite conversation. The new hire, Ethan, was already there, bright and focused, settling into his desk with a confident ease that seemed almost preposterous to Nathan. Ethan's presence was magnetic, drawing attention without effort, his every movement measured, deliberate, as if the office itself bent subtly to accommodate him. Nathan observed silently, noting every gesture, every half-smile, every tiny victory of charm that went unnoticed by management, yet resonated among peers. It was infuriating and instructive at once. Nathan sat at his desk, logging into the familiar glow of his computer screen. He opened his email and was greeted with the usual flood of client updates, memos, and scheduling requests. Each message seemed like a whisper from a world that had no intention of acknowledging his frustration. He leaned back, letting his chair creak softly, and thought about the path he had carved over the past decade. The presentations delivered flawlessly, the crises managed with unshakable composure, the clients impressed, the superiors satisfied. And yet, none of it mattered now. Recognition was ephemeral, merit fleeting. Nathan felt the familiar curl of bitterness tighten in his chest, but beneath it, there was also curiosity, a need to understand why the world rewarded certain individuals over others, and how he could harness that knowledge for his own purpose. It was during one of these long moments of observation that Claire approached, her soft voice pulling him from the haze. "Nathan, are you coming to the team briefing?" she asked, clipboard in hand, a faint frown creasing her forehead. He nodded absently, feeling the weight of every unsaid word pressing against him. "Yeah, I'll be there." As they walked together, he noticed subtle changes in the office dynamics, who lingered near Ethan's desk, who whispered in corners, who avoided eye contact with him. Every interaction seemed loaded with invisible signals, an unspoken code of behavior that he had only recently begun to decipher. He realized that influence was not merely about skill. It was about perception, timing, and the art of subtle manipulation. And if Ethan had mastered it so effortlessly, there had to be a way for him to do the same. But Nathan knew it would require patience, precision, and a willingness to blur moral lines he had previously never considered crossing. The briefing room was small, windowless, and cold, the air heavy with recycled oxygen. Management had gathered around the long table, papers neatly stacked in front of them, pens tapping lightly against notepads. Nathan took his usual seat near the back, keeping his posture neutral, his expression carefully unreadable. Ethan occupied a seat near the front, radiating confidence, offering polite smiles to those around him. As the meeting progressed, Nathan listened to updates, strategy discussions, and projections with a detached focus, mentally cataloging every detail. He noted the tone of every comment, the pauses, the emphasis, tiny cues that indicated who held sway and who merely existed in the shadows. During a segment on client acquisition, Ethan spoke. His voice was calm but deliberate, filled with certainty that bordered on charm. He presented a brief proposal for a new approach, suggesting minor adjustments to existing strategies. The room nodded, murmured, agreed. It was a small thing, almost inconsequential, yet it drew attention, praise, and approval that should have been Nathan's by right. Nathan felt the old pang of resentment spike sharply, but forced himself to remain neutral. Observation, he reminded himself. Always observation first. Reaction could come later. After the briefing, Nathan returned to his desk, the hum of fluorescent lights mixing with the distant drone of traffic outside. He opened a drawer and retrieved a notebook, a leather-bound journal he had kept for years but rarely shared. Pages were filled with observations, reflections, and plans, an internal map of the office ecosystem. Today the entries would be different. Today the observations were tinged with strategy. He sketched a rough diagram, connecting individuals, influence points, and subtle weaknesses. For the first time, he considered the possibility that recognition could be engineered, influence could be cultivated, and power could be seized, not through waiting, but through deliberate action. Mid-morning passed with the quiet intensity of a world unaware of the storm building within him. Nathan noticed Ethan leaning back in his chair, scrolling through messages on a tablet, seemingly unburdened by the work piling up around him. A pang of curiosity mixed with irritation. How could someone so new navigate so effortlessly? How had the tides of favor shifted so quickly? Nathan realized he needed more than just patience. He needed understanding. He needed insight into Ethan's methods, his motivations, and perhaps his vulnerabilities. It was Claire who unknowingly provided the first clue. She approached Nathan with a folder, speaking softly. "I noticed some discrepancies in the client reports," she said, sliding the folder toward him. "Nothing alarming, but you might want to look." Nathan opened it carefully, scanning the data. It was subtle, almost imperceptible. Small errors, minor misalignments, but patterns emerged. Someone was cutting corners, relying on appearances rather than accuracy. And though Nathan could not yet confirm it, a slow, dangerous thought began to form in the back of his mind. Ethan's charm was effective because it masked gaps in competence. For the first time that day, Nathan felt a flicker of possibility. The world had overlooked him once, but it was not infallible. There were weaknesses to exploit, vulnerabilities hidden beneath the veneer of success. And if observation and precision were combined with subtle action, influence could be redirected, attention could be seized, and recognition could be claimed. Not through waiting for favor, but by orchestrating circumstances to his advantage. By afternoon, the tension in the office was almost tangible. Nathan moved deliberately, avoiding unnecessary interactions but observing all interactions around him. He noticed the subtle ways people deferred to Ethan, the slight nods, the suppressed glances, the almost imperceptible shifts in posture. Each movement was a thread in a larger web of influence, a network he was now beginning to map meticulously in his mind. It was a game of perception, and Nathan, for the first time, saw the rules clearly. Late in the day, as the office began to empty, Nathan found himself alone in the quiet hum of the fluorescent-lit floor. He opened his notebook again, jotting down observations, connecting patterns, and noting the small inconsistencies Claire had pointed out. The plan was forming, not fully defined yet, but enough to ignite a dangerous spark of anticipation. The storm that had simmered within him for weeks was coalescing into something tangible, something that could alter the balance of power. As he left the building, Nathan paused at the edge of the street, rain beginning to drizzle again. Reflections shimmered on the asphalt, distorted and fragmented, like the possibilities swirling in his mind. He felt the familiar weight of exhaustion, yet beneath it, a surge of controlled energy, a sense that, despite the setbacks, he was moving towards something significant. The day had revealed not only the unfairness of the system, but also the tools to navigate it. And as he walked through the wet streets, he realized that the pursuit of recognition might require more than effort. It might demand cunning, patience, and a willingness to embrace shadows he had never before dared to enter. That night, back in his apartment, Nathan revisited the journal. Each page was a roadmap, each observation a piece of the puzzle. He traced lines connecting names, influence points, and subtle weaknesses, the notebook becoming a living organism of strategy and anticipation. The anger that had once threatened to consume him was now tempered by clarity, a razor-sharp focus that promised results. And somewhere in the quiet flicker of city lights through his window, he felt a thrill, an intoxicating mixture of risk, possibility, and the slow, deliberate crafting of power. Tomorrow, he thought, would be the first real test. A minor misstep by Ethan, a subtle misdirection, a carefully timed revelation. These could be the first stones in a foundation of influence Nathan had long dreamed of. Recognition, it seemed, was not a gift to be granted, but a conquest to be executed. And as he finally allowed himself to rest, eyes closing to the dim glow of the city beyond, he knew that the game had begun. The rules were clear, and the first move would soon be his. The morning sun broke through the clouds with a hesitant light, painting the city in pale gold that refracted off wet streets and glass towers. Nathan stepped out of his apartment building, coat collar turned up against a brisk wind, a notebook tucked under his arm like a secret weapon. The world seemed unaware of him, moving in its habitual rhythm of commuting suits, taxis, and distant horns, and yet, in that very indifference, Nathan found an opportunity. Today was not about waiting, not about resignation. It was about action, deliberate, calculated, and unseen. The elevator ride to the office was quiet. The usual mix of idle chatter and scrolling phones muted in Nathan's focus. Each floor passed like a heartbeat. Each moment a small step closer to the stage where the first act of his subtle campaign would unfold. He glanced at his reflection in the metallic walls, noting the tight line of his jaw, the slight shadow under his eyes. There was weariness, yes, but also a newfound resolve that shimmered beneath the surface. He would play the long game, shaping perception, planting seeds, and watching them take root without revealing the gardener behind them. Inside the office, the usual rhythm greeted him. Phones buzzed, printers clicked, keyboards clattered, and conversations floated in low, murmur-like waves. Ethan was at his desk, already engaged in a meeting with 2 junior team members, gesturing animatedly, a smile tugging at the corners of his face. Nathan observed from across the room, notebook open, noting the cadence of Ethan's voice, the way his hands moved, the almost imperceptible patterns in his speech that made him appear competent and charismatic simultaneously. Nathan's first move was small, almost invisible. He approached a team member, Jason, someone who had often struggled to have his contributions recognized. "Hey," Nathan said casually. "I noticed a few inconsistencies in the client feedback reports. I think you might want to double-check the last submission before it goes out." Jason blinked, a mixture of surprise and relief crossing his face. "Oh, thanks, Nathan. I didn't see that. Really appreciate it." It was a minor gesture, but it served multiple purposes. First, it positioned Nathan as observant, capable, and helpful, someone whose attention to detail could not be ignored. Second, it subtly highlighted the flaws in the workflow that others had overlooked, including Ethan, whose oversight had gone unnoticed by management. Nathan returned to his desk, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips. Observation had become action. Action had become influence, and influence would soon shift attention in subtle, decisive ways. By mid-morning, the office had begun to notice small anomalies. Files were reorganized, minor errors corrected, and whispers circulated about who had caught the mistakes. Nathan remained quiet, letting the recognition circulate indirectly. Ethan, unaware of the subtle undermining, continued his work, confident that his charm and appearance of diligence were enough. Nathan noted every small misstep, cataloged every interaction, and began mentally plotting the next moves. Claire approached again, this time with a question about project allocation. Nathan leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "I think we need to reconsider how these accounts are distributed. Ethan's team might be overloaded, and it could be affecting accuracy." Claire nodded, frowning slightly. "That makes sense. I hadn't thought about it that way." The seed was planted. Nathan's insight positioned him as thoughtful, strategic, and subtly indispensable, while Ethan remained oblivious to the shifting perception. The afternoon was punctuated by tension in small, almost invisible ways. Nathan noticed a glance exchange between Ethan and a manager, a flicker of doubt passing too quickly to be captured by anyone else but him. It was subtle. A hesitation in response to a question, a slight pause before speaking. Nathan filed it mentally. A small vulnerability, a crack in the armor of competence. Every detail mattered. Every observation counted. The world rewarded perception over effort, but perception could be manipulated if one knew where to press, when, and how. During a brief coffee break, Nathan lingered near the kitchen, watching the interactions unfold. Ethan chatted animatedly with colleagues, laughter ringing lightly, gestures broad and confident. Nathan's mind worked in quiet increments, dissecting tone, posture, and inflection. Claire approached, carrying 2 mugs. "Nathan, here," she said, handing him one. "You've been buried in work all morning." He accepted it, nodding in thanks, and for a fleeting moment she hesitated. There was curiosity in her eyes. A question unasked, but understood. What was Nathan planning? He smiled faintly, a shadowed expression that revealed nothing. "Just observing," he said softly, words deliberately ambiguous. She nodded, accepting the answer, and drifted away. Nathan sipped the coffee, bitter and grounding, letting his thoughts wander. The office was a chessboard, each person a piece moving according to unspoken rules. Ethan was the pawn that everyone assumed would become a knight, the figure everyone was willing to elevate. Nathan, however, had realized that the pieces could be manipulated, the board could be tilted, and perception could be redirected with careful, deliberate effort. As the day waned, Nathan initiated the next subtle act. He sent an email to a key client, highlighting potential improvements in the workflow, and subtly hinting at oversights that had gone unnoticed. The email was professional, measured, and utterly precise. By the time it reached the client, the suggestions would appear thoughtful, strategic, and necessary, and although he did not overtly claim credit, Nathan knew that the ripple effects would eventually elevate his visibility within management circles. By the time the office emptied, Nathan lingered at his desk, reviewing the day's subtle victories. The satisfaction was quiet, almost imperceptible, yet profound. He had not confronted, not accused, not overtly challenged, but the first seeds of perception had shifted. He had begun to tilt the balance, and in doing so, he had reclaimed a fragment of control over a world that had seemed indifferent. As he prepared to leave, Nathan received an unexpected message on his phone. A cryptic text from an unknown number. "I know what you're planning. Be careful." His pulse quickened, a sharp edge cutting through the calm he had cultivated. Who could it be? A colleague? Someone from management? Or Ethan? The thought alone sent a shiver down his spine. Nathan stared at the screen for several long seconds, weighing his options, before slipping the phone back into his pocket. Observation first, reaction later. Patience above all. Walking home, the streets were slick with evening drizzle, the city lights reflecting like shards of fractured reality. Nathan felt a subtle thrill in the danger implied by the message. The game had escalated, stakes rising in ways he had not anticipated. The world had always been unfair, but now he realized the rules were fluid, unpredictable, and mutable, if one dared to navigate them with precision. Back in his apartment, he reviewed the day in meticulous detail. Each interaction, each glance, each subtle misstep by Ethan was cataloged in the notebook. Patterns emerged, vulnerabilities became evident, and possibilities multiplied. Nathan's mind raced, not in anxiety, but in exhilaration. The game had shifted from reactive to proactive, from mere survival to strategic dominance. Late that night, sleep finally found him, but it was uneasy, punctuated by dreams of office corridors stretching endlessly, of shadows moving just out of reach, of voices whispering secrets he had yet to uncover. And in those dreams, a faint, insistent realization began to take root. The office was no longer just a place of work. It was a stage, a battlefield, and Nathan was both observer and actor, strategist and manipulator. The lines between fairness and cunning blurred, revealing a landscape in which effort alone was insufficient, but intelligence, patience, and perception could rewrite outcomes. When morning came again, Nathan rose with renewed focus. The city outside was bathed in the cold, pale light of early dawn, mist curling off buildings and streets like ghostly fingers. He dressed deliberately, each motion precise, each decision calculated. The first moves of influence had been successful, but the real test was just beginning. He would need to escalate, to maneuver subtly around allies and rivals alike, and to exploit weaknesses without revealing intent. Nathan knew one truth above all. Recognition was never given. It was taken, earned, or in some cases orchestrated with skillful manipulation. And as he stepped into the elevator and began the descent to the office, he felt the first true thrill of anticipation. The game had begun in earnest, and nothing, neither luck, nor charm, nor favoritism, would dictate its outcome. Only his mind, his patience, and his carefully plotted strategy could determine who would emerge victorious. And somewhere, unseen but sensed, another presence watched. Perhaps a colleague, perhaps management, perhaps Ethan himself, someone who had perceived the subtle shifts, the quiet rearrangements of power. The message on Nathan's phone had been a warning, yes, but also a confirmation. The stakes were real, and the world he had begun to navigate so carefully was alive, observant, and ready to respond. The day stretched ahead like a tightrope, and Nathan, notebook in hand, mind sharpened to a precise edge, was prepared to walk it with deliberate, unwavering focus. Every glance, every gesture, every word would be measured. The office was a theater of perception, and Nathan had become both playwright and actor, crafting a narrative that would bend the world around him, subtle, yet irresistible. The city woke in a muted haze, the sunlight barely breaking through low clouds, painting the streets in shades of gray and gold. Nathan's apartment was quiet except for the soft hum of the radiator and the distant clatter of morning traffic below. He stood by the window, notebook in hand, tracing the connections and observations he had made over the past week. The office was no longer merely a workplace. It was a battlefield, and he, the unseen tactician, had begun to rearrange the pieces. Today, he decided, he would escalate. The stakes were higher now, and subtlety alone would not suffice. He dressed with deliberation, each motion precise. Gray suit, polished shoes, tie knotted perfectly, a uniform of professionalism masking the storm of strategy inside his mind. He paused briefly in the mirror, studying the tension in his jaw, the intensity in his eyes. Confidence could be cultivated as carefully as competence, and Nathan intended to embody both, projecting authority without revealing the calculated nature of his actions. Every detail mattered: posture, tone, timing. The office would perceive what he wanted it to perceive, even before he acted. The elevator ride to the office was silent, save for the soft mechanical hum and the occasional cough or shuffle of papers from other occupants. Nathan's focus was sharp. He analyzed the other passengers, noting subtle interactions, body language, and fleeting expressions of impatience or curiosity. These were minor observations, but in his mind, every detail contributed to a larger map, a map of influence, perception, and opportunity. Arriving at the office, Nathan found the familiar rhythm unfolding around him. Phones buzzed, keyboards clattered, printers whirred, and muted conversations drifted like a soft background melody. Ethan was already seated, reviewing notes on his tablet, exuding calm and charm as always. But Nathan noticed the tiniest signs of tension: a brief hesitation in response to an email, a faint furrow in the brow when scanning client data, subtle indications that the veneer of competence could be breached if pressed carefully. Nathan's first move of the day was deliberate and quiet. He approached a manager, Harold, someone known for his meticulous attention to detail, but also his tendency to overlook interpersonal dynamics. "I reviewed the client projections for next quarter," Nathan said casually, leaning slightly against the edge of Harold's desk. "There are a few trends I'd noticed that might need adjustment. Nothing alarming, but it could impact our outcomes if left unchecked." Harold looked up, eyes narrowing briefly before softening in appreciation. Interesting. I hadn't considered it that way. Good observation, Nathan. It was a minor action on the surface, but it carried multiple effects. Nathan positioned himself as vigilant, competent, and indispensable while also drawing subtle attention to gaps in the workflow. Gaps that Ethan, despite his charm, had missed. The first ripple of influence spread quietly, unnoticed by all but Nathan himself. By mid-morning, whispers had begun to circulate. A junior colleague mentioned Nathan's suggestions to another team member, who mentioned them to Claire, who, in turn, casually relayed them to others. Recognition was shifting incrementally, imperceptibly, like the slow turning of a tide. Nathan observed silently, cataloging every acknowledgement, every nod, every fleeting glance of curiosity or approval. The game was unfolding exactly as he had predicted, but he knew the stakes would rise, and with them, the necessity of careful escalation. During a client call that afternoon, Nathan made his next move. Ethan led the conversation, presenting projections and recommendations with practiced charm. Nathan listened, interjecting only occasionally with questions that seemed innocuous but subtly revealed gaps in Ethan's preparation. The client, perceptive and attentive, paused at one such question, seeking clarification. Ethan faltered slightly, not dramatically, but enough for a subtle shift in perception to occur. Nathan observed the micro-expression, a brief flicker of doubt, a hesitation before recovering composure. The shift was almost imperceptible, yet Nathan recognized it for what it was: an opening. Influence could be guided, perception nudged, attention redirected. The next step, he realized, would require courage, precision, and a willingness to embrace the moral ambiguity he had long skirted. After the call, Nathan returned to his desk and opened his notebook. Diagrams, connections, and notes sprawled across the pages in a meticulous web. Each observation, each minor misstep by Ethan, each acknowledgement Nathan had received, or orchestrated indirectly, was cataloged with surgical precision. He traced lines connecting vulnerabilities, opportunities, and potential outcomes. A plan was forming, one that moved beyond subtle nudges into deliberate manipulation. Nathan knew he needed allies, though not overt ones. Influence was often reinforced by perception of consensus, and small whispers of support could amplify his presence far more effectively than confrontation. He approached Jason, who had already demonstrated loyalty and a subtle dependence on Nathan's guidance, and offered a quiet suggestion. If you handle the reporting adjustments I mentioned earlier, it could really help streamline the client presentations. Management will notice the improvement, and it reflects well on the team. Jason nodded, eyes bright with recognition, unaware of the larger strategy Nathan was orchestrating. By late afternoon, the office atmosphere had shifted imperceptibly. Ethan, despite his charm, seemed slightly unsettled, micro-expressions betraying fleeting moments of uncertainty. Nathan's influence was growing, but he also sensed danger. The cryptic message from the previous day lingered in his mind, a shadow over the otherwise orderly strategy. Someone was aware, someone was watching, and that someone could disrupt the delicate balance he was constructing. As the workday ended, Nathan lingered near the elevator, waiting for the few stragglers. Claire approached, her expression hesitant, eyes darting toward Nathan. Are you sure everything's okay? You've been intense lately. Nathan met her gaze, a calm smile curving his lips. Everything's fine. Just focused, that's all. Observation? Strategy. You know how it is. Claire nodded slowly, the tension in her eyes easing slightly. Nathan knew she suspected more than she admitted, and that was precisely the point. Perception could be manipulated without revealing the hand that guided it. Later that evening, Nathan returned to his apartment, rain beginning to fall again in soft, persistent drizzles. The city streets glistened, reflections distorted like fractured illusions. He sat at his desk, notebook open, tracing connections and revisiting the day's subtle maneuvers. Patterns emerged, vulnerabilities became clearer, and possibilities multiplied. He realized that the office was no longer a simple environment of work. It had become a complex ecosystem of perception, influence, and unspoken power dynamics. Nathan's thoughts turned again to the message on his phone. Who had sent it? Who had perceived his subtle shifts? And more importantly, what could they do to counteract him? The unknown observer added a thrill, an edge to his strategy. The presence of an unseen opponent elevated the stakes, forcing him to anticipate reactions and outcomes with even greater precision. Night deepened, and Nathan's mind refused rest. He envisioned the office as a chessboard, each person a piece moving according to subtle rules of perception and influence. Ethan was the pawn elevated too quickly, visible and vulnerable. Jason was an unassuming ally, malleable and receptive. Claire was both a potential observer and an unintentional amplifier of perception. Nathan's strategy would require careful orchestration of events, careful nudges of attention, and calculated exposure of vulnerabilities, all while maintaining the appearance of neutrality and competence. The rain outside thickened, streaking against the window, mirroring the growing tension in Nathan's mind. He traced lines in his notebook, considering contingencies, visualizing outcomes, predicting reactions. The subtle game he had initiated was beginning to take on momentum, but with momentum came risk. Every step could reveal him. Every miscalculation could undermine weeks of careful observation and subtle manipulation. And then, as if the universe were responding to the intensity of his focus, a sudden idea struck him. Bold, audacious, and dangerous. It involved more than observation or subtle nudging. It required taking control of the narrative directly, orchestrating an event that would force recognition, reveal vulnerabilities, and reshape perception irreversibly. The plan was risky, morally ambiguous, but exhilarating in its audacity. Nathan leaned back in his chair, staring at the city lights, mind racing. The world had always rewarded perception over effort, charm over merit, and favor over diligence. But perception could be molded, favor could be redirected, and influence could be seized with strategy and patience. He felt the faint thrill of anticipation, the intoxicating sense of potential unfolding, and the quiet, unyielding certainty that the next few days would determine not just recognition, but dominance. Somewhere in the quiet of the night, Nathan realized that he was no longer merely an observer in this game. He was a participant, strategist, and manipulator, guiding the currents of perception with subtle, deliberate hands. And somewhere, unseen but sensed, another presence watched, waiting, calculating, and ready to respond. The stakes had risen. The rules had shifted, and the next move would be decisive. As the rain continued to streak the windows, Nathan traced a line in his notebook, connecting the threads of observation, influence, and vulnerability into a single, audacious plan. The office, the city, and the intricate web of human perception would all become instruments in a game that had only just begun. And Nathan, silent, focused, and deliberate, was ready to play. The morning air carried a sharpness that seemed to slice through the city streets, a crispness amplified by the occasional gust that rattled loose signs and sent umbrellas tumbling. Nathan walked to the office with a quiet intensity, notebook clutched in one hand, mind alive with plans. Today, he decided, the subtlety of observation alone would not suffice. The first decisive move would be executed. Carefully, calculated, precise. He had spent days mapping vulnerabilities, observing interactions, and planting the smallest seeds of doubt in the minds around him. Now it was time to see the first visible effects of his orchestration. Inside the office, the usual rhythm continued, but Nathan moved through it with a different awareness. Every glance mattered, every expression a data point. Ethan was at his desk, smiling, speaking animatedly with colleagues, unaware of the shifting tides beneath him. Nathan watched, noting the fleeting tension in his posture, the subtle twitch of a hand, the fraction of a second when confidence faltered. These were the cracks he intended to widen. The first step was a calculated intervention during the morning briefing. As management discussed upcoming client projects, Nathan interjected, not aggressively, not overtly challenging Ethan, but with the quiet authority of someone who had observed and understood the gaps others missed. I noticed in last month's client data that there were several inconsistencies that could impact our projections, Nathan said, voice calm, deliberate. If we address these now, we can prevent errors from escalating. The room paused. Ethan's confident smile faltered for a moment, and Nathan noticed a subtle tightening in the shoulders. The manager, Harold, inclined his head slightly, a flicker of recognition passing in his eyes. Nathan had planted a seed, an acknowledgement of diligence, but also a subtle hint that Ethan's preparation was incomplete. The shift was imperceptible to most, but in the microcosm of office perception, it was profound. By mid-morning, Nathan's influence began to ripple outward. Jason executed tasks with meticulous precision, implementing adjustments Nathan had quietly suggested. Claire noticed improvements in workflow and, without realizing it, relayed these subtle changes to others. Recognition, once absent, began to gravitate toward Nathan indirectly. He remained in the background, observing, calculating, noting who responded to what cues and how perception shifted. The office, unaware of the puppet strings at work, began to reflect his subtle influence. The first major confrontation came during a client call in the late afternoon. Ethan led the presentation, confident, charming, articulate. Nathan listened, interjecting only when it served to illuminate a gap, an overlooked metric, a misaligned projection, a question that nudged Ethan toward recalculation. The client paused, thoughtful, and for a moment Nathan glimpsed the unmasking of perception. Ethan faltered, answering with care but lacking the seamless assurance he had projected before. Nathan's calm, deliberate tone contrasted sharply, reinforcing a sense of reliability that was quietly contagious. When the call ended, Nathan noticed the subtle shift in the client's demeanor. More attentive, more responsive to his measured observations, less deferential to Ethan's charm. It was a small victory, yet monumental in the architecture of influence he was constructing. He cataloged it in his notebook, every detail etched with precision, micro-expressions, pauses, tone of voice, response patterns. These details would inform the next steps, the larger maneuvers that would escalate the unfolding drama. Back at his desk, Nathan took stock of the day's subtle but decisive shifts. Ethan's confidence appeared less unshakable. Colleagues were beginning to see Nathan not merely as competent, but as essential. The patterns he had observed over weeks were now converging into tangible influence. And yet, the cryptic warning from the unknown sender still lingered at the back of his mind. Someone was aware, watching, potentially ready to counteract his strategy. The awareness of being observed added a dangerous thrill to his careful manipulations, sharpening every decision, heightening every interaction. Late in the day, Nathan executed the most daring move yet. He sent a carefully crafted email to senior management, presenting a subtle critique of the current project management process and offering an innovative solution. The wording was precise, professional, and seemingly innocuous, yet the implications were profound. He highlighted inefficiencies, suggested improvements, and positioned himself as both insightful and indispensable. Within the hour, murmurs of recognition began to filter through the office, not as direct praise, but as subtle acknowledgement among colleagues and supervisors. Nathan remained outwardly calm, but internally, the thrill of control coursed through him. By evening, as the office emptied and fluorescent lights dimmed, Nathan lingered near the window, notebook in hand, observing the interplay of shadows in the streets below. He reflected on the week's events, the subtle shifts in perception, the carefully orchestrated interventions, the vulnerabilities exposed without overt confrontation. Each day had been a rehearsal, each interaction a brushstroke in the painting of influence he was constructing. The city's hum outside matched the rhythm of his thoughts, continuous, dynamic, alive. That night, alone in his apartment, Nathan reviewed every observation, every interaction, every subtle victory. The plan had escalated beyond observation into strategic execution. Influence had shifted subtly, imperceptibly, yet power, soft, quiet, undeniable, was beginning to coalesce around him. And as he traced connections in his notebook, he realized that the office, the city, and the intricate web of human perception were now instruments in a game that he was orchestrating with precision. But it was in the quiet hours that the unexpected twist arrived. A knock at the door shattered the night's stillness. Nathan, cautious but composed, approached and opened it to find Claire standing there, expression conflicted. She held an envelope, plain, unmarked. "Nathan, I think you need to see this," she said, voice low, almost urgent. Inside were copies of emails, memos, and internal communications, evidence that someone higher in management had been manipulating project outcomes, steering recognition toward Ethan deliberately. The revelation hit like ice water. The promotion had not been a simple act of favoritism, but part of a calculated scheme by senior figures using charm and perception to control the team. Nathan's mind raced, a mixture of shock, anger, and exhilaration. Everything he had believed about the world's randomness, about merit being invisible, was partially true, but now he understood the deeper currents. The world did not just reward charm over effort. It rewarded compliance with hidden agendas, manipulation of perception at levels he had barely considered. And suddenly, the stakes of his own game were far higher. He was not merely influencing peers, he was navigating a hidden labyrinth controlled by unseen hands. The next days became a delicate, high-stakes dance. Nathan continued his subtle manipulations, but now with knowledge of the hidden forces at work. He observed, recorded, and executed interventions with increased precision, aware that every move could trigger reactions from those he had never suspected. Ethan, unaware of the larger schemes, became a pawn in both Nathan's careful influence and management's covert orchestration. Every interaction, every glance, every email became a node in a complex network of perception and power. By the end of the week, Nathan had achieved subtle dominance over perception. Colleagues looked to him for guidance, management began to notice his insights, and Ethan's charm, while still superficially effective, was increasingly shadowed by Nathan's quiet authority. Yet Nathan knew the real game was only beginning. The hidden architects behind the promotion had yet to reveal their full intentions, and with that knowledge came the intoxicating thrill of strategy, risk, and the possibility of rewriting outcomes on a scale far larger than he had ever imagined. As Nathan sat alone, reviewing his notebook, the city lights twinkling like fractured constellations below, he reflected on the precarious nature of influence. Merit alone had never been sufficient. Charm could elevate, but subtle understanding of perception, patience, and the courage to act decisively were the true instruments of power. And in the quiet of his apartment, he allowed himself a moment of satisfaction, tempered by awareness that the world he was navigating was far more complex and dangerous than he had previously realized. And now, for the audience, a question lingers. If effort and skill are invisible to the world unless cloaked in perception, how far would you go to manipulate it? When recognition is a game of influence rather than merit, where does morality end and survival begin? And finally, if the hidden architects of fate are orchestrating outcomes beyond your sight, could you still seize agency? Or would you be forced to play the part assigned to you? My sibling invited me to their wedding, to my ex. Everyone says I should be happy, but I feel a mix of anger, jealousy, and unresolved grief. I want to support my sibling, but I also want to protect my heart. Can you truly celebrate someone else's happiness while still processing your own pain? The rain fell in soft, relentless sheets, streaking the glass panes of Emma's apartment like tiny rivulets of grief. The city outside hummed with indifferent life. A taxi horn pierced the muted rhythm of raindrops, the distant wail of a siren curling into the night. Inside, Emma sat curled on the edge of the sofa, knees pressed against her chest. A lukewarm cup of tea cradled between trembling hands. The cup left faint, wet rings on the coarse fabric of the throw blanket, as though marking the slow erosion of her composure. The invitation lay open on the coffee table, its pristine envelope stark against the clutter of scattered papers and a half-read novel. She had stared at it for hours, the words dancing before her eyes, refusing to form into anything coherent. It was not the invitation itself that unsettled her. Weddings, after all, were a familiar rhythm. Promise, celebration, the merging of lives. It was whose wedding it was that fractured the familiar cadence of her thoughts. Her brother Daniel had extended the invitation with a bright, unassuming smile over lunch, oblivious, or perhaps willfully blind to the maelstrom he had stirred. And the bride was her ex, Mark. The same Mark whose laughter used to echo in her apartment in the early hours of the morning, whose hand had fit in hers like it had been carved for the purpose, whose absence now felt like a wound that had never quite scarred. Emma's fingers traced the edge of the envelope, nails pressing into the paper until the sharpness made her wince. The memory of that night, the night it all ended, rose unbidden. It wasn't dramatic, not the sort of breakup that lingered in cinematic slow motion. It was quiet, almost cruelly mundane. Words exchanged over a lukewarm coffee, the faint bitterness of unspoken truths lingering in the air. And yet, it had shattered her. She had thought herself strong, had imagined that the months of distance and the slow rebuilding of herself would have dulled the sharp edges of the past. But now, confronted with the possibility of seeing him walk down the aisle in a dress she had never imagined wearing for him, that illusion of strength felt laughable. Outside, the rain intensified, drumming against the window like the hurried pulse of a nervous heart. She glanced around the room, at the dim light spilling from the floor lamp, the shadows pooling in the corners where dust motes floated like tiny, indifferent specters. Her apartment had become a cocoon of sorts, a place where she could linger in the quiet despair that no one else could see. She wanted to call Daniel, to tell him she couldn't do it, that it hurt too much, but a small, stubborn voice in her chest reminded her of his excitement, the meticulous way he had planned everything down to the last detail. It was important to him, and she loved him too much to be the one to cast a shadow over his day. The phone vibrated on the arm of the sofa, breaking her reverie. She hesitated, thumb hovering over the screen, before finally answering. "Hey," she said, her voice smaller than she intended. "Emma, are you okay? Did you get the invitation?" Daniel's voice was light, almost too cheerful, a stark contrast to the heaviness pressing on her chest. Yeah, I got it," she said, forcing calm into her words. She could almost hear the smile in her own voice, the brittle veneer of composure. "You're coming, right?" he asked. and the question hung in the air, deceptively simple yet impossibly heavy. Emma swallowed. I'm not sure yet. The admission felt like a betrayal, though she couldn't articulate why. Daniel sighed, a faint tremor of something like disappointment threading through it. Emma, I know it's complicated. I know you and Mark had history, but this day, it's not about that. I want you there. Please. She closed her eyes, taking a slow breath. I'll think about it. She hung up before he could respond, her chest tight with a blend of relief and guilt. She set the phone down, eyes drifting to the rain again. The city outside was indifferent to her torment. Neon signs flickered through the gray curtain of rain, their colors muted, bleeding into one another. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolled, low and sonorous, marking time that no longer seemed hers to keep. For hours, Emma moved through the apartment in a trance. She checked her reflection in the bathroom mirror repeatedly, as if seeing herself could somehow prepare her for the inevitability of confronting Mark again. Her reflection looked back with wide, uncertain eyes, cheeks pale, hair tousled from absent-minded running of fingers. The mirror didn't lie. She was tense, drained, the lines of sleepless nights etched faintly around her eyes. She wasn't ready. And yet, a small, defiant part of her whispered that avoidance would not be a victory. She had to see it, eventually. She had to witness how life had moved on without her. Night bled into dawn, the storm outside relenting to a tentative drizzle. Emma finally found herself standing by the window, looking down at the wet streets below. A lone figure hurried along the sidewalk, umbrella barely keeping pace with the wind. She imagined it was Mark, though she knew it wasn't. And yet the thought made her chest tighten with something she couldn't name. Jealousy, grief, the cruel sting of nostalgia. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass, trying to ground herself in the present, to distinguish between what was real and what her imagination had conjured to torment her. Her apartment phone buzzed again, and she jumped, heart hammering. This time, it was a text from her best friend Mia. Emma, are you sure you're ready for this? You don't have to go if it's going to hurt. The words hit her like a lifeline, and a weight all at once. Emma leaned back into the sofa, staring at the ceiling, letting her mind wander into the labyrinth of what-ifs and could-bes. She imagined the wedding in painstaking detail, the aisle lined with flowers, the soft hum of a string quartet, Mark's hand intertwined with Daniel's in a way that had once been hers. The thought made her stomach churn. She wanted to scream. She wanted to leave. And yet, somewhere deep down, she recognized a strange, unavoidable pull, a need to witness it, to face the collision of past and present, to somehow reconcile the fractured pieces of herself. Days passed, each one a slow, aching rhythm of anticipation and dread. Emma found herself wandering the city streets at odd hours, trying to lose herself among the indifferent masses. Cafes, bookstores, even the dim light of late-night convenience stores became temporary refuges. She listened to conversations not her own, watched couples move in synchrony, and felt a pang of longing she could neither name nor suppress. Each moment was a reminder of what she had loved, what she had lost, and what she might never reclaim. And then came the text from Daniel she had been waiting for. Final SVP tomorrow. Please. Emma stared at it for hours. The cursor blinked on the empty reply box like a judge, awaiting her verdict. Finally, she typed, deleted, typed again. The words refused to come easily, and when they did, they felt like a surrender. I'll come. She hit send before she could second-guess herself, before she could succumb to the instinct to run. The week of the wedding arrived with relentless precision. Emma's apartment became a whirlwind of preparation. trying on dresses she hadn't worn in years, brushing her hair until it glinted under the soft lamplight, rehearsing the polite, measured smiles she would wear like armor. And all the while, a storm raged inside her, a chaotic blend of fear, resentment, and unresolved longing. The night before the wedding, Emma sat on the balcony, the city lights shimmering like distant constellations through a thin veil of fog. She could feel the tension coiling in her stomach, each breath shallow, each thought a spiraling dance between anticipation and dread. And in the quiet, a question gnawed at her relentlessly. Could she truly celebrate her brother's happiness while carrying the weight of her own fractured heart? The answer, she knew, would not come easily. Morning arrived with a soft, hesitant light that filtered through the sheer curtains of Emma's apartment. The air was crisp, scented faintly with the lingering rain from the night before. She stood by the window, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear, and watched the city slowly awaken. The streets shimmered with wet asphalt. Pedestrians huddled under umbrellas, and a lone bus rumbled past, sending a spray of water over the sidewalk. For a moment, she allowed herself to breathe, letting the morning calm seep into her chest. But the calm was deceptive, fragile. A storm still brewed beneath her ribs, an insistent reminder of the day ahead. Emma had arrived at the venue early, more from nervous anticipation than any practical necessity. The wedding was to be held in a restored old mansion perched on the edge of the city, its ivy-clad walls a muted contrast against the gray sky. The gravel driveway crunched under her shoes as she approached, the sound unnervingly loud in the quiet morning air. She paused at the entrance, hesitating as if the threshold were a portal into a world she wasn't ready to enter. The scent of damp earth and flowers greeted her, a combination sweet and suffocating. She swallowed hard, feeling the weight of every memory she had tried to suppress. Inside, the mansion hummed with quiet activity. Staff moved like shadows, arranging flowers, adjusting table settings, and polishing silverware until it gleamed under the soft glow of antique chandeliers. The air smelled faintly of wax and roses, a perfume that made her stomach twist with a strange combination of nostalgia and anxiety. Emma's eyes swept over the space, noting the high ceilings, the intricate moldings, the way sunlight pooled on the polished wood floors, and for a brief moment, she was struck by the surreal beauty of it all. But the beauty was a fragile mask, and beneath it, her mind roamed back to the past. Then she saw him. Mark stood near the grand staircase, talking to a bridesmaid, his profile sharp against the filtered sunlight. His laughter, low and easy, carried across the room. Emma felt her chest constrict, her fingers tightening around the strap of her clutch. He hadn't seen her yet, and for a moment, she considered turning away, retreating into the quiet safety of the lobby. But she didn't. Something, curiosity, courage, or perhaps a stubborn need for closure, kept her rooted in place. Mark's eyes finally met hers, and the world seemed to pause. There was a flicker of surprise in his expression, a subtle shift in posture, and then recognition. The moment stretched, a taut wire pulled tight with unspoken history. Emma swallowed, forcing herself to move, to approach with a smile that felt fragile, like a pane of glass ready to shatter. "Emma," he said, his voice measured, careful. There was no warmth, no malice, just an acknowledgement of the past and a subtle curiosity about the present. "Hi," she replied, her voice softer than she intended. She could feel the heat rising to her cheeks, a mixture of shame, longing, and lingering hurt. "You look happy." Mark's lips curved in a small, polite smile. "I am. It's a big day." His gaze flicked past her for a moment, as if ensuring he wasn't caught in a trap of nostalgia, before returning to her face. You look well." Emma nodded, words failing her. She wanted to say so many things, the anger, the grief, the jealousy, But instead, she offered a measured nod. The hallway felt too small, the air too thick, as if the mansion itself were holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable collision of past and present. The rehearsal had begun, and Emma followed the staff through the ornate corridors, her heels clicking against the polished floor. She caught glimpses of the guests as they arrived, strangers smiling, families embracing, children running down the hallways, their laughter a stark contrast to the tight coil of anxiety in her chest. She could feel the layers of her own restraint fraying with each passing moment, the polite smile she had donned for Daniel's sake beginning to feel like a mask she could no longer hold. In the main hall, the rehearsal proceeded with meticulous precision. Chairs were aligned in perfect rows, floral arrangements were adjusted until they were symmetrical, and the string quartet practiced the opening notes of the first piece. Emma found a seat near the back, her posture stiff, hands clasped tightly in her lap. She watched Mark move through the space, helping the bridesmaids adjust their dresses, offering a quiet word of reassurance here, a smile there. The sight was almost unbearable, a reminder of the intimacy and warmth she had once known, now rendered inaccessible by time and circumstance. Daniel approached her during a brief pause in the rehearsal. His expression was open, earnest, and for a moment Emma felt a surge of love and guilt all at once. "I'm glad you're here," he said softly, lowering his voice. "I know it's complicated." Emma forced a nod. "I want to be here, Daniel. I really do. It's harder than I thought it would be." He placed a hand on her shoulder, firm but gentle. "I know, and I appreciate that. Just remember that this day is about all of us, not just Mark and me. You belong here too." She wanted to believe him. She wanted to surrender to the warmth of family, to the safety of shared love. But the knot in her stomach, the jagged pulse of unresolved emotion, reminded her that belonging was not always a choice, and sometimes the heart resisted even the most well-meaning intentions. As the rehearsal drew to a close, Emma wandered toward the mansion's gardens. The rain from the previous night had left the flower beds glistening, petals heavy with water. She inhaled the scent of wet earth and roses, letting the crisp air wash over her, trying to push back the memories that threatened to consume her. And then she saw him again, Mark, standing alone by the fountain, staring down at the rippling water. Their eyes met once more, and this time, the silence between them spoke volumes. Emma could see the subtle tension in his jaw, the faint shadow beneath his eyes, and she realized that perhaps he, too, was wrestling with the ghosts of the past. For a fleeting moment, she allowed herself to hope that this encounter might not be a battlefield of emotions, that they could exist side by side without tearing each other apart. But then she noticed something, a flicker of movement behind Mark, a figure emerging from the shadows, observing them with an intensity that made her skin prickle. She squinted, her heart lurching. It was a woman, unfamiliar, with dark hair and sharp features, standing just beyond the edge of the garden. She said nothing, made no move, but the weight of her gaze was palpable. Emma felt a cold finger of dread trace her spine, an instinctual warning that the day would not unfold as neatly as rehearsals, and polite smiles suggested. Emma backed away slowly, her pulse quickening. She had come here to navigate her own pain, to support her brother, to confront the past with cautious grace. She had not expected to be drawn into something entirely unknown, a shadow hovering at the edges of joy and grief. The night before the wedding ended with a quiet unease settling over the mansion. Guests had retired to their rooms, staff had cleaned and prepared for the morning, and Emma found herself standing once more on the balcony, overlooking the gardens now washed silver by moonlight. She could hear the faint murmur of the city beyond the trees, the occasional drip of water from the eaves, and in the distance, the soft rustle of leaves whispering secrets she could not yet understand. Emma's thoughts spiraled, moving between hope and fear, anticipation and dread. She knew that tomorrow would demand more of her than she had anticipated. More courage, more restraint, more confrontation with the truths she had long tried to ignore. And deep down, she sensed that the day's events would not unfold in the orderly fashion Daniel had envisioned. There were unseen currents at play, undercurrents of emotion and secrecy that threatened to overturn the careful balance of family, love, and memory. As she turned to go inside, Emma paused at the edge of the balcony, staring at the moonlit fountain below. Something about the way the water rippled, reflecting fractured beams of silver light, made her chest tighten. She had the sense, an unshakable, instinctive sense, that the wedding, for all its beauty and celebration, would not be the sanctuary she had hoped for. It would be a crucible, a place where past and present collided, where secrets lingered in the shadows, and where her heart would be tested in ways she could not yet imagine. And in that quiet, suspended moment, Emma felt the first true tremor of what was to come, a tremor that would ripple through her life, unraveling certainties, challenging loyalties, and revealing truths she had never expected. The morning sun spilled gold across the mansion's gardens, glinting on droplets clinging to petals and leaves like tiny prisms. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and freshly cut grass. Emma arrived early before the guests, before the formalities, before the laughter and music would mask the quiet undercurrents swirling beneath the surface. She wore a simple, elegant dress, its muted color designed to blend into the periphery. She did not want attention. She wanted observation, a chance to witness without being ensnared. The gardens were alive with preparation. White chairs had been aligned in perfect rows along the aisle, floral arrangements balanced on pedestals like living sculptures, and a gentle hum of activity threaded through the air as staff carried baskets of petals, adjusted ribbons, and whispered instructions. The string quartet rehearsed softly under the pergola, the delicate notes weaving through the crisp morning air. Emma lingered at the edge of the gathering, her fingers brushing along the wrought iron railing of a small balcony. She watched as Mark appeared, impeccably dressed, hair carefully styled, his movements calm, deliberate. He laughed softly with Daniel, a natural ease in his gestures that made Emma's chest tighten with a strange aching ache, an echo of what had once been hers. Daniel approached her, his smile warm but edged with tension. "You made it," he said, his voice low. "Thank you. It means a lot." Emma nodded, offering a thin smile. "I wouldn't miss it," she said, though even she questioned the truth of the words. The rehearsed composure she had perfected over the last days was already fraying at the edges, of fragile armor against the tidal wave of emotions beneath. The first guests began to arrive, their laughter and greetings filling the space with a light that seemed almost unbearable to Emma. She watched families embrace, children run in carefree arcs across the lawn, couples lean into each other in quiet familiarity. Each scene was a mirror reflecting the intimacy she had lost, the life she had once imagined for herself, and the cruel reminder that the past could not be reclaimed. As the ceremony approached, Emma found herself seated at the far end of the aisle, careful to remain on the periphery. She studied the faces around her, taking mental notes. The mother of the bride adjusting her pearl necklace, the elderly man with a camera resting against his chest, the bridesmaids whispering among themselves. She felt like an observer of a world she had been allowed to glimpse but never fully inhabit. And then she saw her. The woman from the garden the night before, the shadow at the edge of memory, now seated near the front row. Dark hair swept over her shoulder, sharp features framed by the delicate lines of a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Emma's pulse quickened. The woman did not look directly at her, but there was a subtle awareness in the way she shifted, a tension in her posture that suggested she had been waiting, watching, anticipating something unknown. The string quartet began, their music delicate and haunting, and all at once the world seemed to narrow to the aisle. Emma's breath caught as the first figures emerged. Children scattered petals with innocent precision, the sunlight catching on their hair, on the petals glinting like tiny fragments of light. And then Mark appeared at the end of the aisle, flanked by the groomsmen, his expression calm, a practiced serenity that betrayed none of the emotions Emma imagined roiling beneath. Daniel's arm linked with the woman walking down the aisle, his bride, her ex, and the world felt unsteady beneath Emma's feet. Mark's laughter and warmth, once hers, now belonged entirely to someone else. She felt the bitter edge of jealousy, a grief sharpened by the beauty of what she had lost. Every smile, every glance exchanged between them was a reminder that her place in this chapter of life had been irreversibly removed. Emma focused on her breathing, on the slight quiver in her fingers, on the shallow rise and fall of her chest. She tried to remind herself that she had chosen to be here, that she had wanted to witness, that she had promised Daniel she would support him, but desire and reality are rarely aligned, and every heartbeat seemed to echo with the sharp resonance of a past she could not abandon. As vows were exchanged, Emma felt the world tilt slightly. The words spoken, the promises, the tender confessions, the laughter, were not just for the couple. They were for everyone present, a collective acknowledgement of love, of union, of beginnings that came at the cost of other endings. Emma's eyes blurred despite her efforts, the tears she had resisted for weeks threatening to spill. She pressed a tissue against her lips, hoping no one would notice, hoping the fragile mask she wore would not shatter in the presence of so much joy. The ceremony concluded, and applause rippled through the gardens like a gentle wave. Guests began to mingle, exchanging congratulations. Photographs were taken, and Emma felt a subtle shift in the atmosphere. Mark and Daniel were momentarily swept into conversations with friends, leaving. Emma with the briefest window of solitude. She moved toward the garden's edge, seeking quiet, seeking the fractured reflection of herself in the still fountain. And then the woman stepped forward, her presence unmistakable, cutting across Emma's tentative refuge. "You," she said softly, her voice carrying an edge of familiarity and something else. Calculation. Perhaps curiosity. "You've been here all along." Emma turned slowly, her heartbeat accelerating. The woman's eyes were sharp, searching, and for a moment, Emma felt exposed, stripped of the careful composure she had maintained. I don't know what you mean," Emma said, her voice tentative. The woman smiled faintly, a curl of lips that was almost predatory in its precision. "Oh, I think you do," she said. "You've been watching, waiting, holding on to... what? Regret? Jealousy? Pain? It's hard to tell, really." Emma's chest tightened. She wanted to speak, to demand answers, to assert control over this intrusion. But the words caught in her throat, swallowed by the sudden, visceral awareness that her carefully managed presence at this wedding was no longer sufficient to protect her. "You think you came here for them?" the woman continued, her tone soft but sharp. "But really, you came here for yourself." Emma's eyes narrowed. "Who are you?" The woman laughed lightly, a sound that sent a shiver down Emma's spine. "You can call me Iris," she said, "but names aren't important. Intentions. That's what matters. And your intentions are complicated, aren't they?" Before Emma could respond, Iris stepped closer, her gaze fixed on Emma with an intensity that made it impossible to look away. "You think this day is about Daniel and Mark," she said, voice low, almost conspiratorial. "But it's about the choices we make, the things we leave behind, and the ones we can't see coming." Emma felt a shiver of unease crawl up her spine. There was something in Iris's tone, a weight, a gravity, that suggested knowledge far beyond her immediate experience. I don't understand, she stammered. Iris tilted her head, letting a strand of dark hair fall across her face. You will, she said softly. Soon enough. But for now, watch closely. The people you think you know, they are not as they appear. And the day is only beginning. Emma's mind raced, a cascade of questions and suspicions flooding her senses. Why was this woman here? How did she know her so intimately? And what did she mean by, the day is only beginning? There was an ominous undertone, a subtle suggestion that beneath the surface of celebration, something unpredictable, perhaps dangerous, was waiting to emerge. Emma forced herself to breathe, to steady her racing heart. She glanced back toward the crowd, at Daniel laughing with Mark, at the guests immersed in congratulations and photographs, at the string quartet adjusting their instruments. Everything seemed normal, too normal, and yet the tension in her chest told her otherwise. Iris's presence lingered in her mind, a shadow at the edge of awareness, as Emma realized that this wedding, this day she had thought would be a simple act of support and closure, was unraveling into something far more complex. Secrets, intentions, hidden desires. All of it was converging here, in the gardens, under the delicate archways and the watchful eyes of those who pretended to know everything. Emma returned to her seat, but the awareness of Iris's gaze never left her. Every smile, every polite nod from a guest, every laugh that floated through the air seemed laced with unspoken meaning. She realized, with a sinking certainty, that the story she thought she knew, the story of love, loss, and family, was only one layer. Beneath it lay a labyrinth of hidden truths, waiting to surface, waiting to shift everything she had believed about the people around her. The reception would begin in moments, and with it, the real test of Emma's composure, resilience, and perception. She could no longer remain a mere observer. She had been drawn into the story, whether she wanted to be or not, and the day's unfolding events would force her to confront not only her past, but the unsettling presence of secrets that threatened to change everything. And somewhere, in the soft murmur of conversation, the clinking of glasses, and the distant notes of the string quartet, Emma felt the first tremor of revelation, the first whisper of the shocking truths that would not remain hidden much longer. The reception hall was a cathedral of light and shadow. Crystal chandeliers reflected against polished wooden floors, scattering prisms across white linen tablecloths and gleaming silverware. Candles flickered in their holders, casting long, wavering shadows along the walls, and the scent of roses mingled with the faint tang of champagne. Music flowed from a grand piano in the corner, soft, yet insistent, a melody that threaded through the chatter, and laughter like a persistent reminder of the day's beauty. Emma stepped into the hall with tentative grace, each movement measured, her senses acutely aware of every detail. Guests milled about, laughter and conversation forming a delicate hum that she both sought and resisted. Cameras clicked, capturing moments she felt like intruding upon, yet could not look away from. She navigated through clusters of people, nodding politely, offering smiles that felt rehearsed but necessary. Each step brought her closer to Mark, closer to Daniel, closer to the collision of past and present that she had tried so hard to prepare for. Mark approached a group of friends, his hand resting lightly on the small of Daniel's back, the movement familiar and intimate. Emma's chest tightened, the tight coil of jealousy and grief refusing to loosen. She watched as he laughed, animated and effortless, the warmth in his gestures now reserved entirely for Daniel and others. She wanted to look away, to escape to a corner and retreat into herself, but the draw was too strong. She needed to see it all, needed to witness how life had moved forward without her. And then she noticed her, the dark-haired woman from the garden, gliding through the crowd with deliberate ease. Iris. She moved like a shadow, silent, yet palpable. Each step measured, her eyes scanning the room with calculated precision until they settled on Emma. A shiver ran down Emma's spine, and she realized that Iris's presence was no accident. Something about the way she carried herself, a quiet confidence combined with an unsettling awareness, suggested that she had a purpose here far beyond observation. Emma tried to focus on Daniel, on the celebration, on the carefully constructed happiness around her. But every glance, every laugh, every subtle gesture of intimacy between Mark and Daniel reminded her of the fragility of her composure. She sipped her champagne, the bubbles sharp against her tongue, grounding herself in the physical, in the tangible, in the moment. The first toast approached. Emma watched as the best man stepped forward, raising his glass with a practiced flourish. The room hushed, and a ripple of polite applause followed. Daniel's eyes found hers briefly, offering a small, reassuring smile. Emma returned it, her own lips curling in a tight, fragile line. The toast began with laughter and warm anecdotes, but as the words flowed, Emma's mind wandered, drifting to the past. The nights of whispered confessions, the laughter that had once filled quiet apartments, the ache of absence that had never fully dulled. Then, just as she thought she could regain composure, a commotion drew her attention. At the edge of the hall, Iris had approached a small table where a group of guests had gathered, leaning in to whisper something to them. The group responded with subtle nods, glances exchanged, and then, inexplicably, one of the guests moved toward the hall's entrance, a deliberate urgency in their steps. Emma's pulse quickened. Something was shifting, a quiet tension threading through the joyous atmosphere like an imperceptible tremor. She felt compelled to follow, moving through the crowd with careful discretion, each step measured, each breath controlled. As she reached the edge of the hall, she glimpsed a small figure slipping out a side door, the light behind them casting a long, distorted shadow across the floor. Emma hesitated, the instinct to retreat warring with an inexplicable curiosity, a need to see where this unseen thread might lead. The garden outside was a mirror of itself from the morning, bathed now in the warm glow of lanterns strung between trees. The fountain shimmered in the light, its surface catching reflections of movement and shadow. Emma moved closer, the soft crunch of gravel beneath her shoes loud in the stillness. And then she saw it. Mark, standing with his back to her, speaking in hushed tones to a figure she did not recognize. His voice, though low, carried enough for Emma to catch snippets. "We can't let this come out." "Not today." Her stomach twisted, something she had not anticipated. Something beyond the pain of past love, beyond jealousy or grief, was at play. Mark's words, laced with urgency and secrecy, hinted at consequences she could not yet fathom. Emma's heart pounded, each beat a drum signaling the escalation of stakes she had not signed up to navigate. Iris appeared then, silently stepping from the shadows, her presence magnetic, unsettling. "You see?" she murmured, almost to herself, almost to Emma. "You're not just a guest. You're a witness. And witnesses change everything." Emma's mind raced. "What do you mean?" she whispered, though no one was listening. Her voice barely disturbed the night air. Iris tilted her head, her eyes glinting with a mix of amusement and seriousness. "Secrets always surface," she said, voice low. "Especially on days like this. Days of celebration. Because joy is fragile, and fragility reveals the hidden things people think are buried." Emma's pulse quickened. She wanted to step back, to retreat to safety, to pretend she hadn't heard. But the magnetism of the unfolding mystery drew her forward, toward the fountain, toward the shadowed figures, toward truths she was both terrified and compelled to confront. A sudden movement caught her attention. Daniel, unaware of the clandestine conversation, laughing as he approached Mark. Emma froze, realizing that the perfect facade of happiness, the carefully orchestrated celebration, was a fragile veneer, one that could shatter with a single revelation. She felt the weight of impending chaos press down on her, an invisible hand squeezing her chest, demanding acknowledgement of a reality she was not ready to face. And then it happened. A sound, a subtle, almost imperceptible click, echoed through the garden. Emma's eyes widened. A camera, small, precise, hidden among the foliage, had captured the moment she had stumbled upon. Iris smiled faintly, her presence now unmistakably deliberate, as though she had orchestrated every angle, every observation. "You see, Emma," Iris said, her tone almost conversational, almost gentle. "Everything is connected. Every glance, every secret, every choice. And now, the day's true story begins." Emma's mind reeled. What story? Whose story? And what part was she to play? The revelation, whatever it would be, loomed like a dark cloud, hanging over the gardens, over the mansion, over the fragile veneer of celebration. Every heartbeat echoed with the uncertainty of what was to come. The distant laughter of guests, the soft clinking of glasses, the music from the reception hall, all seemed suddenly discordant, masking the undercurrent of tension that threatened to erupt. Emma realized with a sinking certainty that the wedding, for all its beauty and ceremony, was no longer a simple celebration. It was a stage, and she, unwillingly or not, was both observer and participant in a drama whose conclusion she could not yet predict. Her gaze returned to Mark. He was laughing now, unaware of the shadows gathering around him, unaware of the subtle, unseen forces at play. And Emma felt the familiar ache, jealousy, grief, unresolved longing mixed now with fear, anticipation, and the undeniable thrill of witnessing the hidden truths poised to surface. Iris leaned close, her voice a whisper. "Brace yourself, because the revelations of this night will change everything you think you know. And the person you thought you understood best may not be who you believe." Emma swallowed hard. The night air seemed suddenly thick, almost oppressive, as though the garden itself were holding its breath. She realized that nothing in the carefully choreographed day had prepared her for what was coming. Secrets, hidden motives, unexpected betrayals. They waited in the shadows, and by the time they emerged, nothing would ever be the same. The first tremor of revelation had already begun, and Emma, unwillingly and inexorably, had stepped into the eye of the storm. The reception hall had grown warmer with the flicker of candles and the low hum of conversation. The once orderly energy of celebration now a subtle, taut tension threading through the air. Emma lingered at the edge of the dance floor, champagne untouched in her hand, eyes darting toward Mark and Daniel as they mingled. Every laugh, every glance, every touch between them now carried a silent weight. She felt herself suspended between longing and dread, the line between observer and participant blurred beyond recognition. And then the first tremor broke. A sudden crash of glass echoed from the corner of the hall. Guests turned, startled, eyes wide as a waiter had dropped a tray of glasses, shattering crystal and spilling champagne across the polished floor. For a heartbeat, laughter and murmurs replaced with alarm, Emma felt the metaphorical mirror of her own fractured heart crack. She didn't move. Her gaze was fixed, tracing the path of the commotion, when she noticed Iris stepping forward from the shadows, her expression unreadable, a faint, almost imperceptible smile curving her lips. Emma's instincts screamed caution but curiosity An insistent, undeniable pull kept her rooted in place. She followed Iris with her gaze as the dark-haired woman moved toward a small side door. Unseen by the crowd, Emma hesitated, then slipped quietly after her, the soft click of her heels swallowed by the hum of recovery inside the hall. Outside, the garden was muted in silver moonlight. Lanterns hung from trees, their glow casting long, wavering shadows that stretched across wet grass. The fountain rippled, reflecting fractured images of the mansion and its festivities. Emma stepped lightly toward Iris, who waited by the fountain, hands clasped behind her back. "You need to see this," Iris said softly. Her voice, calm yet insistent, carried an authority Emma couldn't ignore. "What's happening in there is only the surface. Beneath it, truths are unraveling." Emma's pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" Iris gestured toward the hall. "Mark isn't the man you think he is. Daniel isn't as innocent as you imagine. And the people around them? They carry secrets that will redefine everything. You think this is about a wedding? It's about choices, consequences, and the invisible threads we leave untied." Before Emma could respond, a figure emerged from the shadows. Mark, alone, his expression tense, unguarded in a way Emma had never seen. He glanced toward the hall, then at her, hesitation flickering across his features. "Emma," he said, voice low, I didn't expect you here right now. I'm following," she admitted, though the word felt insufficient to describe the sudden, fragile alliance forming between them, built on shared uncertainty and the pull of truth. Mark's eyes darkened with unspoken worry. "It's not safe. You shouldn't be—" "You?" Emma interrupted, surprised at the sharp edge in her own voice. "And yet you've been hiding something. I can see it in your hands, in your words. Don't pretend you're untouchable." The tension stretched between them, thick and heavy, before Mark finally sighed, a long, shuddering exhale that seemed to release months of restraint. "Fine," he said. "You deserve to know, but it will change how you see everyone." He motioned for her to follow closer to the fountain. Emma's breath caught as he revealed a small envelope, sealed and ominously unmarked. This contains something Daniel doesn't want anyone to know," Mark whispered. "If it surfaces tonight, everything, relationships, trust, appearances, will collapse. I couldn't stop it before. I didn't know if you should see it." Emma's hands trembled as she reached for the envelope. The weight of it felt impossible, heavy with consequence, with the potential to reshape the narrative she had been living in. She hesitated, imagining the faces of the guests, the laughter, the innocence, the fragile happiness hanging in balance. And yet, the pull of truth was undeniable. With deliberate care, she broke the seal. Inside were photographs, messages, and documents, evidence of choices made in secret, betrayals carefully concealed, and connections Emma had never imagined. Daniel's meticulous planning, his carefully maintained facade, crumbled beneath the weight of evidence. Iris's warning had been more than a provocation. It was a key, unlocking a reality Emma had refused to see. Emma felt nausea, rage, grief, and a strange, grim sense of clarity converge. Everything she had thought she knew, the innocence of the wedding, the sincerity of Mark and Daniel, the surface-level harmony of family and celebration, was a veneer. And now, she held the truth. The silence of the garden was broken by footsteps. Daniel. He appeared suddenly, anger and shock flaring across his face as he saw Emma holding the envelope. "Emma, what are you—" "I know," she said quietly, voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "I know everything." His expression faltered. You shouldn't have—" I had to, she interrupted, stepping closer, eyes fixed on him. Not for you. Not for Mark. For me. For the truth. How can I celebrate happiness built on lies? The confrontation was electric, charged with the collision of love, betrayal, grief, and moral reckoning. Mark stepped forward, eyes flicking between the siblings, tension threading the air like a live wire. It doesn't have to end like this, he said, voice urgent. We can manage it, carefully. Tonight is too important. Emma shook her head, the clarity of resolve settling in her chest. No. Tonight is the night we face it. Tonight is the night we see what we've been avoiding. The revelation unfolded in waves. Guests were drawn into the subtle chaos, whispers spreading through the hall like wildfire. Daniel's carefully curated image of perfection fractured. Mark's past decisions and concealed intentions were laid bare, and Emma, once the observer, found herself at the center of an upheaval she had neither anticipated nor desired, but which she could not ignore. The night carried a strange, almost cathartic beauty. Tears were shed, confessions made, and truths laid bare in the glow of candlelight and the shimmer of lanterns. Emma felt a curious mixture of grief and liberation, the weight of unspoken history finally giving way to the raw, unfiltered reality of the present. For the first time in months, she understood that supporting someone else's happiness didn't require sacrificing her own need for truth, clarity, or emotional integrity. By the time the final toast was made, the hall quieted under the fragile light of revelation. Guests, once caught in the illusion of celebration, now understood the intricate web of human desire, deception, and consequence that threaded through their lives. And Emma, standing beside Mark, with Daniel awkwardly navigating the aftermath of exposure, felt an unexpected calm. Pain lingered. How could it not? But it was tempered by understanding, by the release of long-held tension, by the acknowledgement that life's complexities could not be contained by polite smiles and orchestrated ceremonies. Later, Emma sat on the balcony alone. The city spread beneath her in a soft glow, its indifferent hum a comfort. She held her champagne loosely, gaze drifting to the twinkling lights reflected in the wet streets below. She thought of the past, of love lost, of grief endured, of jealousy and anger wrestled quietly in the solitude of her apartment. And she thought of the future, uncertain but undeniably alive, a canvas both terrifying and exhilarating in its blank potential. Her thoughts lingered on the questions that had guided her through the day. How can one celebrate another's happiness while carrying unresolved pain? What is the line between support and self-preservation? And when the truth of the past collides with the fragile constructions of the present, how do we navigate the aftermath without losing ourselves? Emma understood finally that life rarely offered simple answers. We exist in the intersection of choice and consequence, memory and perception, love and grief. And sometimes, the greatest acts of courage are quiet, facing the truth, confronting the hidden threads, allowing oneself to feel fully, even when the world demands composure. She closed her eyes, breathing deeply, and allowed herself to feel the fullness of the moment, the sorrow, the relief, the release, the faint glimmer of hope. The wedding, for all its upheaval, had become a testament, not to perfection, but to humanity in all its messy, complicated, beautiful truth. And as she watched the city lights shimmer through the mist, she wondered quietly, reflectively, for herself and for the audience, how much of our own pain are we willing to face to honor someone else's joy? When does support become self-sacrifice? And when does honesty become liberation? And in the delicate balance between love, loss, and revelation, are we brave enough to confront the truths we have long avoided, even when they threaten to unravel the life we thought we knew? The night stretched on, quiet, infinite, a living testament to the complexity of human emotion, to the power of truth, and to the resilience of a heart willing to witness, endure, and ultimately to forgive itself.